Oh man, what's going on with y'all, man? Shout out to everybody this morning. Uh this right here gonna be a history lesson, man, to educate, you know, grandpa, man, and shout out to all the grandpas, man, because it's a blessing to get to a certain age, man. So I want to say shout out to all the real grandpas out there. Now, we have a guy, we have a guy by the name of Sonny, right? Hit that like button, y'all. He don't understand history, and you would think that someone of someone at his age would understand history. He said that the black Seminoles were not FBA. This is like pretty ignorant, man. But listen, do you know that they celebrate Juneteenth in Mexico? Foundational Black Americans. What that means is um, you can trace your ancestry to chattel slavery here in America, right? Not blacks who. Anyway, we'll get into that in a minute, man. You'll get a history lesson of what FBA is, man. I don't want to spill everything too quick, but shout out to you. Shout out to everybody that's watching. Shout out to everybody that's rocking. See, in the early 1800s, at one particular time, Spain ruled Florida, right? Spain had ruled over Florida, and the United States wanted that territory. So a lot of the slaves who lived in like South Carolina, Georgia, and that particular region, they would flee to Florida because the Spanish said, if you guys help us in our fight against the British, you guys will have protection, right? So a lot of the slaves from Georgia and South Carolina went to Florida, right? And they joined the Seminoles. And then after years of mixing and having children together, they became the Black Seminoles. So a lot of runaway slaves from South Carolina and Georgia fled to Florida because Florida was Spanish territory, and the Spanish was already at odds, at war with America. So a lot of your runaway slaves would go to Florida for that particular reason. Why do you think they're called the Black Seminoles? I mean, you gotta. I mean, come on, man. Are you this crazy? That's the whole purpose of them calling them the Black Seminoles, because the Seminoles in Florida and the blacks and the Seminoles in Florida and the runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina created a whole tribe together. They mixed, they married, they had babies. They mixed each other's, they mixed cultures, they shared knowledge and information about farming and agriculture, right? So that's why they were called the Black Seminoles. Now, of course, the British was pretty pissed off about their runaway slaves going to Florida, so they wanted to go to Florida to capture them and throw them back in slavery. But see, what a lot of people don't realize is this: a lot of those native tribes that was in Florida, they were runaway slaves because a lot of natives were slaves on this land as well. So a lot of the natives who escaped to Florida, because if they escaped to Florida, they had protection under the Spanish. The Spanish used them as soldiers against the Europeans because they had their own agenda. So a lot of different native tribes escaped to Florida, and it was like Creeks and different tribes, right? And they were they were resisting, the British. They didn't want to be bothered with the British. Now keep in mind, you have the five civilized tribes. Those five civilized tribes complied with the white man. They said, okay, we'll capture slaves and we'll enslave them in exchange for whatever the British said that they would give them. But you also had a lot of native tribes who wasn't assisting the Europeans. And the native tribes who wasn't assisting the British, they went to Florida to seek refuge, right? So the Seminole tribe in Florida was a bunch of tribes who just went there and they blended together and they call themselves the Seminoles. Now, when the blacks came from South Carolina and Georgia and went down there and they intermixed, shared cultures, knowledge of farming and agriculture, that created the Black Seminoles. But those people were foundational Black Americans. Foundational Black Americans fled to Florida for freedom. So for Sonny to say that Black Seminoles are not FBA, he don't understand his history. He clearly don't understand his history. The word Seminole translates to wild or runaway. Exactly. But Sonny doesn't know this. You really can't expect him to. So I'm gonna put the Cash App on the screen and we're gonna get this show started. You had other native tribes. Listen, all the native tribes who fled to Florida, these were Creeks, Cherokees, and different tribes, different native tribes. They fled to Florida and they mixed together and called themselves the Seminoles. Then when the blacks from South Carolina and Georgia came down there and they intermixed with the Seminoles, they started calling them the Black Seminoles. And these were FBA descendants. But you can't expect an old drunk guy like Sonny to understand this. Anyway, man, let's get into some of this history. This dude is nuts.
Our roots are here.
They celebrate Juneteenth in Mexico, man. Those were foundational Black Americans. The Black Seminoles, let me say this to Sonny, the Black Seminoles in Mexico, the Muskogos and the Black Seminoles, they celebrate Juneteenth even in Mexico. Because now this is where the problem came into play. In 1821, the Spanish sold Florida to the British. So that created a problem for the Seminoles because they no longer had the protection under, the Spanish. So this is when the Black Seminoles was going to war because they didn't want to go back to slavery. So in 1821, when Spain sold Florida to the British, the Black Seminoles went to war. They didn't want to be captured. They didn't want to go back in slavery, so they fought hard. There were several battles between the British and the Black Seminoles in Florida. And then at one particular time, they came to like a treaty. They said, the white man said, the British said, we'll give you territory in Oklahoma, but you got to give up your land. But it was a trick. It was a whole trick though. Some Seminoles went to Oklahoma, some stayed in Florida to fight. So the Black Seminoles were fighting for their freedom. They refused to go back into slavery. So there were several battles in Florida where the British would invade Florida and the Black Seminoles would be hiding in the swamps because they understood the land. So they slaughtered a lot of British soldiers down there in Florida. So the Black Seminoles put up a big resistance. And we'll get into that. But don't get it twisted for 1 second, Sonny. The slaves from Georgia and South Carolina fled to Florida. And they blended with the Seminoles that was already down there, that was already hiding out from the British. And they created a tribe called the Black Seminoles. Those were foundational Black Americans. The same way when they left Florida, a lot of Black Seminoles fled to Mexico because they was helping the Mexican government in their war against the Europeans. That's why a lot of Black Seminoles went to Mexico. So the Black Seminoles that you see in Mexico, those are FBA people as well. Now, of course, they mix with other tribes in Mexico, but the original Black Seminoles who fled into Mexico, those were foundational Black Americans from South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, who fled to Florida, and they created the tribe called the Black Seminoles. Because at first they were just called the Seminoles. Then they created the Black Seminoles. So it's no secret. We understand why they celebrate Juneteenth. The Black Seminoles celebrate Juneteenth in Mexico, man. Come on, bro. The history is deep. Hit the like button. Why would they be named wild or runaway if they were not trying to be enslaved? because Seminoles were runaways, right? That's what they called them because they didn't want to be enslaved. And like I said, told the Spanish told all the black slaves, if you can escape to Florida, and help us in our war and do our bidding for us, then we'll protect you from slavery as long as you assist us and conform to what we got going on down here. So a lot of blacks escaped to Florida because Florida was the promised land at that time. A lot of black Seminoles was in Texas. They was in Texas, Oklahoma, all that whole region right there had black Seminoles. Sonny doesn't know what he's talking about.
For us, everything began here.
Actually get to black history, which is also Mexican history. That history took KPRC2 to Nacimiento de los Negros, in Spanish, birth of the blacks.
They got here July 12, 1850 to Coahuila.
Karina Torralba.
Keep in mind, you already had black people in Mexico prior to the black Seminoles. Prior to the black Seminoles going to Mexico, you already had black people in Mexico. Vincent Guerrero, El Negro, abolished slavery in the early 1800s in Mexico. You had Gaspar Yanga down there in southern Mexico fighting off the Spanish. So a black man in Mexico abolished slavery. Look it up. Vincent Guerrero, I believe he was the second president. His nickname was El Negro. So there were already blacks in Mexico way before the black Seminoles decided to go down there. And keep in mind, you had blacks who came from Africa. Then you had blacks who came from the United States of America who fled into Mexico. So what I was trying to tell Sonny is I'm not saying that blacks are Aztecs. You got different tribes of black people. You know, just like you had different native tribes. Not all natives are the same. Not all natives look the same. Not all natives had the same language. If you go to Africa right now, you got different tribes of Africans in Africa. Not all Africans look the same. You got lighter skinned Africans, you got medium complected Africans, you got dark skinned Africans. So just like you had different tribes of natives. Just because you're Mexican doesn't mean that you're Aztec, because a lot of Mexicans have no blood ties to the Aztecs because Mexico was made up of different indigenous tribes. Just like when you go to Africa, it's made up of different indigenous tribes. Not everybody looks the same. It's a big continent.
Torralba, who now lives in San Antonio, was born and raised in Nacimiento. Torralba grew up celebrating Juneteenth with the entire village. She's traveled back to Nacimiento to mark the holiday almost every year of her life.
Like we're talking about the origins of the black Seminoles, you fool. I don't expect for dummies like you who've been brainwashed by Europeans to understand this history. You're silly.
Most people here today, she is an ethnic mix of Mexican, African, and Seminole, descendants of the Negros Muskogos, the phrase for black Seminoles.
And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have what we have here today. You know, this land, you know, this freedom.
So how did they wind up here in Mexico, and whatever caused them to start celebrating Juneteenth?
The history of Muskogos is so important here in Mexico because they grew up helping the government when the other groups were harming the land.
They started as escaped slaves from South Carolina and Georgia, taken in by the Seminole tribe in Florida in the 1820s. In the following decade, they were forced to Oklahoma, along with...
Well, let's talk about why they were forced to Oklahoma. Now, the runaway slaves from South Carolina and Georgia went to Florida to assist the Seminoles that was already down there. So the Seminoles in Florida said, you guys come down here. We'll protect you against the British as long as you guys help us in our fight against the British, because Florida was ruled by Spain during that time. That's what it was. So the black people who fled to Florida, they intermixed. They had babies. They got married to one another. Then they created their own culture and called it the Black Seminoles. Right? They had babies. They shared a lot of knowledge with each other. They created their own culture. So the Black Seminoles are foundational Black Americans. They created their own tribe once they went down there and mixed with the Seminoles.
Several other tribes during what was known as the
when the other groups were harming the land.
They started as escaped slaves from South Carolina and Georgia, taken in by the Seminole tribe in Florida in the 1820s. In the following decade, they were forced to Oklahoma, along with several other tribes, during what was known as the Trail of Tears. Although many
That's because Spain in 1821, if I'm not mistaken, maybe that's the year, Spain sold Florida to the British, but the Black Seminoles didn't want to leave their land, so they put up a fight. So there was a lot of wars taking place in Florida over that land because Florida became a part of the United States. But for a long time, Florida was not a part of the United States because the Spanish ruled it at one particular time. But the Spanish sold it to the British, just like Mexicans sold, parts of America to British. Same situation. But see, the Seminoles didn't want to give up their land. They didn't want to give up their way of life. But the British kept sending soldiers down there. So there was a lot of bloodshed and warfare going on over that land because the Seminoles, the Black Seminoles, refused to leave. So they put up a fight because they knew if we give up this, then we're going to go back into slavery. And they fought so hard to get out of slavery. That's why so many Blacks fled to Florida to join the Seminole tribe. And eventually they created the Black Seminoles. Now, they came to a treaty. I forget what year it was. They said, we'll give you guys land in Oklahoma, but you got to leave Florida. Leave Florida now, and you can be free in Oklahoma. We won't bother you. You guys can have your own land, and you can have your freedom, but you got to move to Oklahoma. So the British promised them freedom, but it was a whole nother twist to that. You know how the European always got a trick up their sleeve. So they convinced a lot of the Seminoles to go to Oklahoma. That's free territory. We won't bother you. But a lot of Black Seminoles stayed in Florida and put up a fight against the British, bro. But don't get it twisted for 1 second. The Black Seminoles, those are FBA people. They were runaway slaves that created their own tribe down in Florida once they mixed with the Seminoles, and they became the Black Seminoles. Black Seminoles have direct blood ties to foundational Black Americans, the slaves in the Deep South, slaves that were in South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina. They have direct blood ties because the foundational Black Americans who escaped slavery that went to Florida, those were foundational Black Americans, man. Like, come on, do you have common sense? Are you drunk? Are you high?
Intermarried with the Florida Seminoles. Because of their noticeably darker skin, they were under constant threat of kidnapping by slave traders. They eventually fled to Texas, then Mexico, where slavery had been abolished in 1829. The government granted them citizenship based on several stipulations. If the Black Seminoles would defend the country's northern border and take Mexican names, they would receive money, livestock, and tools.
So when the Black Seminoles went down to Mexico, see, some of the Black Seminoles went to Oklahoma. Some of them didn't trust the Europeans, so they say, we're going to go down to Mexico. And Mexico told the Black Seminoles, if you assist us in our war against America and protect the borders, we'll give you land, we'll give you money, but you gotta take on these Spanish names. So that's exactly what they did. So it was a fair exchange. You let the Black Seminoles come there to have their freedom, but they assist with the military in protecting the border. So it was like, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. You got the peanut butter, I got the jelly, you got the bread, let's bring it together. So the Black Seminoles went to Mexico to assist the Mexican government. That's why the Mexican government promised them freedom. Okay, as long as you guys help us in this fight, then you guys could have your freedom here. But those are foundational Black Americans who fled to Mexico. The Black Seminoles are foundational Black Americans mixed with natives. That's exactly what they were.
Plus 70,000 acres of land.
The Black Seminoles in Mexico celebrate Juneteenth because they understand their ancestors fled to Mexico, and these were runaway slaves who were foundational Black Americans. Some of you people are too ignorant you guys are too ignorant when it comes to history. There was no such thing as a black Seminole before the blacks in Georgia and South Carolina fled to Florida to blend with the natives that was there. Then they created their own tribe and they named it the Black Seminoles. That's the only reason why they called it the Black Seminoles. Crazy. Because at first, the Seminoles that was in Florida, they were just called the Seminoles. But they became the Black Seminoles when the runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina went down there and they intermingled. They married and had kids. They had children together. They shared cultures. They blended cultures. Then they became the Black Seminoles. Some people are just too ignorant to be speaking on this subject.
They defended for several years, and they received the land that became Nacimiento.
The work that they did, you know, to free themselves, to liberate themselves, to make, you know, look for a safe place for their people as a tribe.
Slaves were set free in Galveston in 1865, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. When the news reached Nacimiento a few years later, the people here began celebrating El Día de los Negros, the Day of the Blacks. It was a day to revel in solidarity, but also in relief. The end of slavery in neighboring Texas meant the Muskogos were no longer under threat of being captured and returned to bondage. About three.
Exactly. That's why the Europeans wanted them back, because the Europeans understood that the Black Seminoles were just runaway slaves. That's why the British wanted to bring them back to the United States. But when they went to Mexico, they assisted Mexico in their fight, so they had protection. Just like when the Black Seminoles escaped Georgia and South Carolina and went to Florida. Spain ruled Florida, and the Spanish said, you guys can come down here and have your freedom. Just assist us in our war. But like I said, eventually Spain sold Florida. So the Black Seminoles had another problem. They said, oh, okay, now that they sold Florida and the British own it, now we got a whole nother problem. Now we might end up going back into slavery. That's why the Black Seminoles went to war with the British down in Florida, went to war with them down in the swamps because they refused to go back into slavery. That was the whole purpose of them fleeing to Florida to escape slavery. But the Spanish eventually sold Florida. And then next thing you know, that created a whole nother issue. The Black Seminoles defeated the British in a lot of skirmishes and a lot of battles, right? So what happened was they said, all right. And guess what? America spent over 22 million on that war against the Black Seminoles. They spent a lot of money on that war with the Black Seminoles because they wanted Florida and they wanted the Black Seminoles to conform and just give it up because they realized how much of a threat the Black Seminoles was. Because like I said, during that time, America spent 22 million on that war. That's a whole lot of money. You think about 22 million back in the 1800s, that's the equivalent to hundreds of thousands. Hundreds, probably like 500 million a day, something like that. Don't quote me, but I'm just giving you an estimated value. But 22 million back in those times, it's still a lot of money today, but imagine how much that was back then. So America spent a lot of resources fighting against the Black Seminoles to get them up out of Florida. And then eventually they said, all right, there's a lot of bloodshed on both sides. Let's come to an agreement. We'll give you guys freedom as long as you go to Oklahoma. Some Seminoles were with it. Some Seminoles were not with it. Some of them went to Oklahoma. Some of them said, nah, we're not going to stay in Oklahoma because we don't trust the Europeans. We're just going to go all the way down to Mexico and assist Mexico. So the history runs deep. This fool said that the Black Seminoles were not FBA, man. You're just foolish. You're just foolish.
300 people call Nacimiento home today, with others working to make sure the history and connection don't fade.
It's real special.
You got a lot of Black Seminole people who still live in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina today. Some of them stayed. Not all of them left. Some of them went to Mexico. Some of them went to Texas. Some of them stayed in Oklahoma. But when you're ignorant and you have no understanding of history, then you fix your mouth to say that the Black Seminoles were not FBA. That's crazy. When literally the runaway slaves are the ones who created the Black Seminoles because they mixed with the Seminoles that was in Florida and became the Black Seminoles. A lot of them fled to Mexico. So the blacks, why do you think they celebrate Juneteenth? Juneteenth is an FBA holiday. So the black Seminoles in Mexico are direct descendants of the runaway slaves in America who created the black Seminoles in the first place when they fled to Florida. Juneteenth is a FBA holiday. So the black Seminoles and Mexico understand their history. They understand their roots. That's why they celebrate Juneteenth in Mexico, because they understand. Matter of fact, this town in Mexico where they celebrate Juneteenth is not too far from the Texas border. It's not too far from the Texas border. So when black people, after the Civil War, when slavery was abolished in America, some of those black Seminoles returned to Texas. Some of them returned to the United States, but a lot of them stayed in Mexico.
Special to me now because my father is now gone. So it's really close to my heart because that's my ancestor.
They don't have to call themselves FBA, but that's where their bloodline comes from. Juneteenth is an FBA holiday. So regardless if they call themselves FBA or not, those are people, because the black Seminoles were nothing but runaway slaves. The Seminoles were runaway slaves. The Seminoles that was in Florida before the blacks in Georgia and South Carolina fled down there, you already had Seminoles in Florida. But when the runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina fled to Florida because the Spanish promised them freedom as long as they helped them with their military type of stuff, they intermixed with the Seminoles and became the black Seminoles. So eventually, like I said, they created their own tribe. So the black Seminoles have direct blood ties to foundational black Americans, the runaway slaves. My God, the fact that I even have to say this proves how foolish and just it proves how foolish people are. They don't understand history.
Sisters, that's my history.
Dina Rodriguez's parents were born and raised in Nacimiento. Rodriguez lives in Lubbock, but travels here often to visit and to celebrate Juneteenth, something friends and neighbors find interesting.
Why are they celebrating that there? There's no black people in Mexico. Yes, there was black people here in Mexico. There's black people everywhere.
Oh, please tell me how long.
And yes, they know how to celebrate.
Oh, no, please tell me how long.
Anybody who's saying the black Seminoles were an FBA, you're just dumb. There was no such thing as black Seminoles before the runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina fled to Florida, intermixed with the Seminoles down there, and created the black Seminoles. That's how they became the black Seminoles, because the foundational black Americans that were runaway slaves who went down there and intermixed with the tribes and created the Seminoles. Some of you people you just need to stop talking, man. And what you guys don't understand is this. A lot of native tribes got reclassified as Negroes once the Europeans came over here. You had native black tribes in the Americas. But when the Europeans came here, they reclassified a lot of those people and just called them Negroes. Because you got to think, the Europeans, the Spanish and all them, they had a caste system. So what they did was say, okay, if you was a certain complexion, they just labeled you as a Negro. So they erased a lot of that history, but you got a lot of black native tribes that still exist today. They got their paperwork, they got everything, and they've been on this land prior to any Europeans showing up. But when you don't study history, you don't understand that. Everybody who was a certain complexion got reclassified as Negroes. So a lot of the black natives, they got mixed and blended. They mixed them in with some of the slaves that they brought over. And eventually they just reclassified them as Negro.
Weekend we visited Nacimiento. The village turned out for an art exhibit and pre-Juneteenth festivities. We all know food is a part of any good celebration, so they cook their traditional Juneteenth dishes.
Why would Mexicans in Mexico celebrate Juneteenth? And that's a FBA holiday, because the black Seminoles in Mexico had blood ties to FBA, the runaway slaves. What's crazy is you got Mexicans in America who didn't even know what Juneteenth is, not realizing that Juneteenth is even celebrated in Mexico. So it proves how much you know about your own country and your own history. You got Mexican Americans who wanted to go to the Kendrick Lamar pop-up. They didn't even know what Juneteenth was. They thought Juneteenth had something to do with Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Selma, Alabama. No, Juneteenth was celebrated right after, the North won the Civil War against the South in America. So the foundational Black Americans in Galveston, Texas, they realized that they were free and they were no longer slaves. This was right after the Civil War was over. So Juneteenth was established in Galveston, Florida. It was established in Galveston, Florida, right after the Civil War. Right. So a lot of those people that were in Texas, keep in mind, you had Black Seminoles in Texas. A lot of them fled to Mexico. So they took their same traditions and a lot of beliefs to Mexico. This is why you have Black Seminoles who celebrate Juneteenth, even in Mexico, not just here in America. But don't get it twisted. Juneteenth was established in Galveston, Texas. But Texas shares a border with Mexico, so it was easy for the Black Seminoles to escape to Mexico. Now, after the Civil War was won, some of the Black Seminoles came back to Texas, Florida, or whatever. Some of them stayed in Mexico, but guess what? They still celebrate Juneteenth in Mexico. Do you know, I bet you like 85% of Mexicans didn't even know that they celebrate Juneteenth in Mexico. Shit, man, the Mexicans in America listen, the Mexicans in America don't even know what Juneteenth is. So you don't know what Juneteenth stands for in America, and they didn't know that Juneteenth was also celebrated in Mexico. So this shows you that they know nothing about history. They know nothing about history.
Vamos a cocinar frijoles.
The horses and their riders prepared for the big day as well.
We know a thing or two about trail rides in Houston, and the Muskogos do as well. The Cabalgata, their horseback riders, have been riding into Nacimiento from nearby Musquis to celebrate Juneteenth since the 1870s.
During Juneteenth celebrations, they also don traditional dress, listening to norteño and wapango music, and also singing capayuye. Hand-clapped ancestral hymns passed down by enslaved peoples to their descendants, all to remember their past, which includes Juneteenth for the Negros Muskogos, a past they are holding on to so they are remembered well into the future.
My parents, especially my dad, loved who he was, loved where he come from, loved Mexico, just loved it. He grew us up that way to be proud of who we are.
Our history, it's a rich history.
And we will continue our journey to Nacimiento shortly, but first I'm joined by my co-anchor, Daniela Guzman, and photojournalist Roger Franco, the man who was right there with me, filming all of that. Yeah, so glad that both of you are here with us.
Guys, how fast?
I bet money Sonny didn't even know that Juneteenth was celebrated in Mexico. He didn't know that. Sonny don't even know. Sonny knows nothing about Mexico. I bet money he didn't know. If you ask him right now, he'll pretend like he knew because maybe he seen me talk about it. But Sonny didn't know that Juneteenth was celebrated in Mexico. Then he said, Black Seminoles aren't FBA, just ignorant. Just ignorant to the facts. The Black slaves created the Black Seminoles when they fled to Florida. There was no such thing as a Black Seminole before the FBA runaway slaves went to Florida. And they intermingled and they married, they had children and created their own tribe, and they called it the Black Seminoles. Prior to that, they were just called the Seminoles. Even the word Seminole was a runaway because, like I said, the natives that was in Florida, these were different native tribes who escaped to Florida, and they created a community together and called it the Seminoles. But when the Black runaway slaves came down there, they named it the Black Seminoles because they lived together. They had children, they married, so they created their own Black Seminole tribe. And the runaway slaves were foundational Black Americans. So the Black Seminoles have direct blood ties to FBA. Sonny wouldn't know that because he's too old and he's too drunk and he don't He don't know what he's talking about.
Fascinating to see those cultures just blending together, the music, the food. It was just so
Yeah,
fascinating.
make sure that you guys bless the like button if you haven't already. Stop being stingy with the like button. Support the show for some of this knowledge, for some of this history.
To see. And I think it's something that, Keith, people would be really surprised to see, you know, a village like this, the connection it has to Juneteenth.
Yeah, the Seminoles were renegades, man. They were renegades. They were runaway slaves and runaway natives that created their own tribe. Jesus Christ, some of these people are just too ignorant for the conversation.
How did you find out about this village and the culture?
About 3 years ago, I simply was reading, I came across it in a magazine, and I was really fascinated by it because I'm from Southeast Texas. I was raised in Bryan College Station, and all my life I grew up celebrating Juneteenth. And so I thought, wow, I've never heard of another country celebrating Juneteenth. Now, there are a lot of other states in this country that don't celebrate it, but to hear that they celebrate it in Mexico. And so I just fell in love with the story. I started getting more and more history on Nacimiento. And, you know, for 3 years, I pushed for the story, and I didn't get to do it for a couple of years. And so I just decided this year. And
Moses is not BS knowledge, bro. It's a known fact that the runaway slaves went to Florida and created a tribe with the natives that was there. They blended, had children together, and created the Black Seminoles. Those are historical facts. You can look it up for yourself. You ain't got to take my word for it. You're just a troll, Moses. You're just a troll. You're nothing but a you're a wannabe Spanish conquistador, bro. That's exactly what you are. Juneteenth is celebrated in Mexico. The runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina fled to Florida and mixed with the Seminoles that were down there, and they created a whole tribe, the Black Seminoles. It's not my fault that you don't want to accept these historical facts because you're ignorant to the facts. You want to come up in here and speak that conquistador knowledge, that conquistador history. Get lost.
January to pitch the story again, and I got approval, and I'm just so very glad. I mean, there should be so many movies and books written and told about this place and how these people got here.
Oh, yeah. Well, good for you for continuing to push and persevere to get this story on the air. And
yes, in Florida, you had the Creeks and other different tribes that was already in Florida because they escaped. Because you got to think, you had some native tribes that assisted the Europeans in enslaving Black people. But then you had some native tribes who didn't assist the British in enslaving Black people. So a lot of those tribes who wasn't assisting the British to assist to enslave Black people, those native tribes fled to Florida because they got protection under the Spanish, because the Spanish ruled Florida at one particular time. So you had runaway natives and runaway FBA slaves who all went down to Florida. They intermixed together, had babies, and created the Black Seminoles. All those natives and Blacks were what you would call runaways. This is why they were called Seminoles and the Black Seminoles. You had some native tribes who assisted the white men in enslaving Blacks. Then you had some native tribes who didn't. And a lot of those native tribes who didn't, well, even some of them who did, they didn't want to deal with that, so they went to Florida. And they had protection under the under Spain at one particular time. But Spain, like I said, Spain sold Florida. I believe it was 1821 when Spain sold Florida, if I'm not mistaken. And then when Spain sold Florida, that created a whole problem for the natives that was there, because America wanted the land. They wanted to kick them off of the land. They said, okay, you either get enslaved by us or you get up out of Florida and you move to Oklahoma. But the Black Seminoles put up a major fight against the British. There were several battles all through the swamps. Then eventually the Black Seminoles got pushed further down to central Florida because the British kept invading, but they were putting up a fight. The history runs deep, brothers.
You went on this amazing journey with Keith. We saw that editing, beautiful.
All right, let's go right here. So we already know that there's what it is, man. The Muskogos and all that. Check this out. That's my man, Bobby. Yeah. What up? Check this out right here.
Soil. Recently, La Presidenta.
Now, there's also evidence that black people were in Mexico prior to any Europeans showing up. You know, even the president acknowledged that and called them indigenous Afro people. So you add indigenous black people in Mexico, you know, even the president of Mexico acknowledged that, right? You know, so they had to add them to the Constitution. But keep in mind, these people been here. So prior to the Black Seminoles fleeing to Mexico, you already had blacks in Mexico that were in Mexico for centuries, way before the Black Seminoles even fled to Mexico. So there were already blacks in Mexico prior to the Black Seminoles coming there. But the Mexican government wanted to use the Black Seminoles because they were already fighting against, you know, the British in America. So they said, let's use some of these Black Seminole soldiers to come down here in Mexico to protect our borders, because they were already going to war with the British anyway. That's why the Mexican government said, okay, you guys can come to Mexico and have your freedom. Just help us to protect our borders against that European. So that's exactly what the Black Seminoles did. Now we're going to talk about blacks who were indigenous, not only to Mexico, but indigenous to the Americas. Now, this is some real history. Now, this is a Mexicano Chicano himself, and he's going to break down some of the history about blacks that were already in Mexico prior to any European setting foot in Mexico or the Americas.
Presidenta de Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, signed 2 edicts into law, which are breathtaking to say the least. What she did and what she signed into the Mexican Constitution are 2 parts. The first part was that the indigenous people within Mexico of many different tribes will now have the ability to have their own sovereign nations. Now, bear with me here. So basically, a commission is set up to recognize those indigenous nations within Mexico and teach them and show them how they can rule autonomously and set up their own rulership over their own people, because there's a lot of indigenous different tribes within Mexico. The second part of that edict that was signed into the Mexican Constitution,
there were a lot of indigenous tribes in Mexico, right? A lot of different indigenous Aboriginal tribes that were in Mexico. Not all of them looked the same. Not all of them had the same language. There was different cultures and different indigenous groups in Mexico prior to the Spaniards even showing up. So when Mexicans say I'm Aztec, there's no guarantee that you're Aztec. That's like there's different tribes in Africa. Just because somebody said that they're from Africa doesn't mean that they belong to a particular tribe. There's so many different tribes in Africa who look different, who have different language, who got a different culture. It was the same in Mexico. It was the same for all over the Americas. The Americas, the North America, Central and South America, you had different tribes of people, different colors and different languages. They didn't all look the same. But when you're fed that Spanish conquistador knowledge, you put all natives in the same box. And the reality of it is they didn't all look alike. They didn't all share the same language. They didn't share the same culture. It was a mixture of different people and different tribes. The same thing in Africa. There's more than one phenotype when it comes to Africa. Just like in the America, there was more than one phenotype when it comes to natives. They look different. Their cultures were different. Check this out. I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to let this play.
Presidenta de Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, signed 2 edicts into law, which are breathtaking to say the least. What she did and what she signed into the Mexican Constitution are 2 parts. The first part was that the indigenous people within Mexico of many different tribes will now have the ability to have their own sovereign nations. Now, bear with me here. So basically, a commission is set up to recognize those indigenous nations within Mexico and teach them and show them how they can rule autonomously and set up their own rulership over their own people, because there's a lot of indigenous different tribes within Mexico. The second part of that edict that was signed into the Mexican Constitution recognizes, and hear me out here, Afro-Indigenous. So, and that basically states that written into the Mexican Constitution, it is now law that the Afro-Indigenous are recognized as full citizens of Mexico and are afforded their indigenous status. And then she went on to state,
they gave the blacks in Mexico their indigenous status, because not all black people in Mexico came from slave ships. Some of them did, and some of them didn't. So they have black aboriginal status in Mexico. They're recognized in the census in Mexico now, because the real anthropologists, the people who did their research and homework, realizes you had black people already there before the conquistadors showed up and colonized the land. So you got blacks in Mexico with their black indigenous status. You ain't got to take my word for it. Look it up. And yes, Juneteenth is celebrated in Mexico because the Black Seminoles went into Mexico. The Black Seminoles are direct descendants of foundational Black Americans. They come from chattel slavery. A lot of them escaped to Mexico to help them in their fight against the U.S. Army. So for you to say that the Black Seminoles are not FBA, clearly you're ignorant to history. Why do you think Mexicans, the Black Mexicans in Mexico, celebrate Juneteenth? Because they have direct blood ties to FBA in America. It just so happened that those Black Seminoles are the ones who fled to Mexico, but they understand their roots. They understand where their people come from, which is why blacks in Mexico celebrate Juneteenth.
Are recognized. Signed into the Mexican Constitution recognizes, and hear me out here, Afro-Indigenous. So, and that basically states that written into the Mexican Constitution, it is now law that the Afro-Indigenous are recognized as full citizens of Mexico and are afforded their indigenous status.
There was no such thing as a Mexican prior to the 1500s, buddy. They used to use indigenous people as slaves, but the blacks were bigger. They were stronger. So blacks made better slaves because of their physical strength. Because of the fact that they were able to endure certain weathers and certain work conditions that the natives wasn't able to endure. So black people made better slaves just based on their physical attributes and their physical strength. That's why they use black people for the slave labor, because of their physical attributes and strength. But keep in mind, there was no such thing as a Mexican prior to the 1500s. Now, let's set the record straight with that. Blacks were already in Mexico before there was a such thing as a Mexican, because keep in mind, Mexico was made up of different tribes. Matter of fact, they didn't even call it there was no such thing as Mexico, and there was no such thing as a Mexican prior to the 1500s. It was a totally different place. The place that we call Mexico now in the 14 and 1500s was occupied by different tribes, people with different languages and different cultures. The Spanish conquistadors created Mexicans in the 1500s. Prior to the 1500s, there was no such thing as Mexico or a Mexican. That was made up by the Spanish Europeans. Mexico was made up of several different tribes. It wasn't even called Mexico, but I'm trying to keep you guys up to speed so you know what I'm talking about. Just like in Africa, you had different tribes, people with different phenotypes who had different languages, different cultures, a whole different way of living. So the same thing existed in Mexico.
Hear me out here. Afro-Indigenous. So, and that basically states that written into the Mexican Constitution, it is now law that the Afro-Indigenous are recognized as full citizens of Mexico and are afforded their indigenous status. And then
how come blacks got their indigenous status now in Mexico? Not all blacks in Africa, not all blacks in Mexico came from Africa. Some of them did come from Africa because the Spanish brought some Africans to Mexico. Do you know that the United States of America only took in 5% of the African population that was brought to the Americas? So what does that tell you? You already had blacks that were here. Let me say this to you, uneducated people. Only 5% of the slaves during the transatlantic slave trade were brought to the United States. The majority of Africans were taken to like Brazil, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. Only 5% of the African slaves got sent to the United States. Only 5%. So the United States received the lowest amount of Africans during the slave trade. The majority of your Africans got sent to Brazil, Cuba, Latin America. The United States only took in 5% of the slaves. But of course, you want to know that, then you got to do say this is Afro propaganda. No, this is real history. See, the reason why they don't want to accept this because this goes against their indoctrination. You got some old drunk grandpa trying to say the Black Seminoles are not FBA when the when foundational Black Americans are responsible for it being called the Black Seminoles. It wouldn't even be called the Black Seminoles if it wasn't for the runaway slaves who went to Florida and mingled with the natives and created their own tribes.
So, and that basically states that written into the Mexican Constitution, it is now law that
now you have Afro-Indigenous. In Mexico, you got Black people who are recognized as Afro-Indigenous. Why do they call them Afro-Indigenous? Because you had anthropologists and scientists who did their research and discovered that Blacks were already in Mexico prior to any European Spanish conquistadors showing up. So now you got people who are labeled Afro-Indigenous and they're recognized in the Mexican Constitution.
The Afro-Indigenous. So, and that basically states that written into the Mexican Constitution, it is now law that the Afro-Indigenous are recognized as full citizens of Mexico and are afforded their indigenous status. And then she went on to state that Mexico recognizes that Afro-Indigenous people were on this continent hundreds of years before the Spaniards stepped 1 foot on the soil. It completely changes the narrative of what we've been taught. It completely changes the idea.
It completely changes the narrative of what Mexicans have been taught. They've been taught that Spanish conquistador history. That's why in the Constitution in Mexico, you have Afro-Indigenous people. They're recognized in the Constitution because scientists and anthropologists did their research and said, hold on, these Blacks were here way before the Spanish showed up. The Spanish just happened to bring more Africans with them. You got Black people in Mexico who came from the United States, which were the Black Seminoles. You had Black Aboriginals in Mexico. Then you also have the Africans that the Spanish brought with them when they came to Mexico. So you have different types of Black people. Not all Black people are the same. The Black Seminoles went to Mexico, right? They fled to Mexico from the United States, the Black Seminoles. The Spanish brought Africans from Africa to Mexico. Then you had Black indigenous people in the Americas way before the Spanish conquistadors showed up. So you got different tribes of Black people, just like you got different tribes of natives. You also have different tribes of Black indigenous people. Then you also have Blacks who came from Africa.
Mexico and are afforded their indigenous status. And then she went on to state that Mexico recognizes that Afro-Indigenous people were on this continent hundreds of years before the Spaniards stepped 1 foot on the soil. It completely changes the narrative of what we've been taught. It completely changes the idea that Columbus was here and there's just Mexicans. It flips it right on its head. Everything is out the door. This is a very intelligent woman. And what she has stated are what people on different social media platforms have been saying for years. Black man was already here. The black man was already here. We didn't come in slave ships. That's not feasible. It would have taken too many ships. They would lose too many people. But if you're taken from Mexico and South America and taken off the coast and sat off the coast for a couple months and then brought up and dropped off in Boston, that makes it a hell of a lot more feasible, don't it? Afro-Indigenous were here hundreds of years before the Spaniards showed up. I'll put this into perspective. The English Bible, the most widely sold book in history, the Bible. New Testament, Old Testament. You can go back in that Bible to the beginning of time of man. Adam, Eve, his wife, conceived from the rib of Adam, and the Creator took that rib. Their children, Cain and Abel, and how that conflict and one brother slew the other. The creation of the earth, the waters, the fish in the deep, the firmament. Okay, enough Bible lesson for today. But yet we can't go back before Columbus. What was the black man's history? How did he get here? The Phoenician? The Israelite?
So now it's you got Afro-Indigenous people, man. So Juneteenth is celebrated in Mexico. It's celebrated in Mexico. That's a fact. Check this out.
Prowess, definitely.
Different way of resisting oppression.
Okay, let's unpack.
See, it don't matter. It don't matter. You can give these people facts all day. They're gonna deny it because this history goes against their indoctrination. You got Mexicans who didn't even know that black Mexicans celebrated Juneteenth in Mexico. Do you know that 90% of Mexicans that I met didn't even know that you had black Seminoles in Mexico who celebrated Juneteenth? Juneteenth is an FBA holiday where we celebrated our freedom after the Civil War was over, when the North defeated the South. That's in Galveston, Texas. That's when Juneteenth was created. So a lot of the black Seminoles went to Mexico, stayed there. Some of them came back to the United States. Now, it's crazy that a black man would have to educate a Mexican about the fact that black Seminoles in Mexico actually celebrate Juneteenth. You got Mexicans who don't even know that. You had LA Icon, a Mexican. He didn't even know what Juneteenth was, and he claimed to be a Mexican. Juneteenth is celebrated in Mexico and in the United States. And you got a Mexican guy who the Mexican cat didn't even know what Juneteenth was. So it shows you how clueless a lot of them are when it comes to history. For Sonny to say that, oh man, the black Seminoles are not FBA. If it wasn't for FBA, there wouldn't be no such thing as black Seminoles. They were called the black Seminoles because of the runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina who fled to Florida when Florida was under Spain's rule. When Florida was under Spain's rule, the Spaniards said, hey man, we'll give you guys freedom. You can come down here. We won't let the British come down here and capture you. As long as you help defend Florida, you guys have your freedom. You're welcome to come here. So a lot of runaway slaves from the South fled to Florida, and they created the black Seminoles once they blended with the native tribes that were in Florida. They had babies. They got married, and they called their tribe the black Seminoles. These were foundational black Americans. Those runaway slaves who fled to Florida were foundational black Americans. That's who created the black Seminoles along with the natives tribe down there, and they blended, mixed together. They were dark-skinned, melanated people, so they said, you know what, we're going to call ourselves the black Seminoles. Then you got drunk-ass Sonny, so the black Seminoles ain't FBA, just dumb. Dumb, da, dumb, dumb, dumb.
Deep dive. Today we're stepping into a story that's been kind of whispered about but not shouted from the rooftops like it should be.
Yeah,
The story of the Black Seminoles.
absolutely.
We're talking about generations of Black resistance, culture.
LA icon, not just him. Most Mexicans didn't even know that Juneteenth was celebrated in Mexico and the United States. So let's say LA icon is not Mexican. He's El Salvadorian or whatever, right? He's a Latino. 90% of Mexicans didn't even know what Juneteenth was. They didn't even understand that you had Black Seminoles in Mexico who celebrated Juneteenth, just like we celebrate Juneteenth here in the United States of America. So the Black Seminoles are foundational Black Americans. That's what they are. But when you don't understand history, you talk it. When you don't understand history, you sound ignorant. You show your lack of knowledge when it comes to history. The Black Seminoles, the Black Seminoles ain't FBA, Dum da dum dum.
Fusion and a journey for freedom that went way beyond what we usually learn in history class.
What's so powerful about the Black Seminole story is it flips the script on how we usually think about Black history, especially in the early days in America.
Yeah.
It shows us a different path to freedom,
Right.
a different way of resisting oppression.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Sure.
We're going back to the late 1600s, a time when slavery was deeply entrenched in the American colonies.
Yeah.
But there's this other story unfolding in Spanish Florida.
Right, and here's the kicker. Spain was actually offering freedom to enslaved Africans who escaped from the British colonies.
Wow.
In 1693.
Listen, I want you to check this out. I've been knowing about this for years.
Yeah.
It shows us a different path.
Yeah, the Mexicans in the comment section are losing their damn minds because they don't want to accept the facts of history. Black Seminoles are direct descendants of FBA people. But when you don't understand history, you don't know that. Sit back. I'm going to give you a history. Listen. Shout out to Cheesehead for blessing the Cash App. Shout out to Stacy for blessing the Cash App. Let's get some people to bless the Cash App, bless the Super Chat, and also bless that like button. And yeah, subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you support this content when I come through with historical facts. Let's get it.
Path to freedom.
Right.
A different way of resisting oppression.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Sure.
We're going back to the late 1600s, a time when slavery was deeply entrenched in the American colonies.
Yeah.
But there's this other story unfolding in Spanish Florida.
Right, and here's the kicker. Spain was actually offering freedom to enslaved Africans who escaped from the British colonies.
Wow.
In 1693, they made it official policy. So you have this wave of people escaping from places like South Carolina and finding refuge in Florida.
So Florida becomes this haven, this beacon of hope, more than a century before the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just Black folks seeking refuge there.
Exactly.
Right.
The Seminole Indians were already living in Florida, and what's so fascinating is that these two groups escaped slaves,
Yeah.
and the Seminoles didn't just coexist.
Right.
They forged deep alliances, shared knowledge and traditions, and built a truly unique society.
Now that's what I call finding common ground. It sounds like they were building something powerful, something that threatened the status quo, but I'm guessing the United States wasn't too happy about this independent Black community thriving on their doorstep, especially with Andrew Jackson on the scene.
You know, Andrew Jackson, notorious for his views on Black people and Native Americans, he saw the Black Seminoles as a threat, a challenge to the expansion of U.S. power. So in 1816, he launches an attack on those settlements.
Okay.
And that's how the First Seminole War kicks off.
So this war wasn't just about land. It was about control, about crushing this thriving community that dared to exist outside the boundaries of slavery.
Yeah.
What were the stakes for the Black Seminoles and their Seminole allies?
For them, it was about defending their freedom, their way of life, and their right to exist as a self-governing community. They had built something special in Florida.
Right.
And they weren't going to let it be destroyed without a fight.
And they didn't. They put up fierce resistance, didn't they? I read about the Battle of Sewanee in 1818, where the Black Seminoles, who the U.S. military called Black Warriors, fought alongside the Seminole Red Sticks, who were traditionalist warriors, resisting assimilation.
Right.
They held their ground against U.S. forces, upholding their commitment to defend the Florida border, just like they'd promised the Spanish.
They proved themselves to be incredibly skilled and strategic.
Right.
Holding off a much larger and better equipped force, the Black Seminoles weren't just fighting for survival.
Right.
They were shaping the course of the war.
Their military prowess definitely made an impact, even though they were eventually forced to retreat. That victory at Sewanee showed what they were capable of. So how did this first Seminole War actually end, and what did it mean for the Black Seminoles?
Well, in 1819, Spain caves to U.S. pressure and cedes Florida to them.
Oh, wow.
That was a huge blow to the Black Seminoles and the Seminoles because they lost the protection they had under Spain.
Yeah.
It forced them to retreat deeper into Florida, further into the Everglades to try and hold on to their autonomy.
Imagine the weight of that moment. The one place that had offered them a chance at freedom was gone, and the U.S. was closing in this. This feels like a turning point, a moment of incredible danger and uncertainty.
It is.
What happens next?
You're right. It's a pivotal moment, and it sets the stage for the Second Seminole War, which is even more crucial to understanding the fight for freedom led by the Black Seminoles.
Okay.
This war was a game changer, the largest slave uprising in U.S. history, and it had a profound impact on the nation.
Okay, now we're talking about
See, the Black Seminoles put up a fight because the reason why they put up such a fight, they said, we fought hard to get up out of slavery. So that's why they fled to Florida. So they put up a lot of resistance against the British. But, you know, what did a lot of damage to the Seminoles in Florida is when in 1821, when Spain sold Florida to the British. But the Black Seminoles fought. They put up a lot of slave revolts. And not just the Black Seminoles, there was a lot of slave revolts in the Americas, like Nat Turner. Look up Nat Turner, how he went from plantation to plantation, unaliving slave owners, burning down plantations all over the South. So there were plenty of slave rebellions that took place over the South. It wasn't just the Black Seminoles who put up resistance. You had other Blacks in other areas in the South who had slave revolts that unalived the slave masters and did a lot of damage to them. So a lot of those runaway slaves said, let's go to Florida and join the Black Seminoles. The natives, the Seminoles that was in Florida already, they were runaways. So the runaway natives and then the runaway slaves created a whole community, created a whole tribe together, and they named the tribe the Black Seminoles. The runaway slaves were foundational Black Americans, 100%. They went to Florida and created the Black Seminoles with the native tribes. It's kind of like you have two gangs that come together. Like you got two gangs that come together to form one gang. Okay, the runaway slaves, the FBA and the Seminoles in Florida came together and created a unique tribe, and they called it the Black Seminoles.
Major turning point in American history. We're not just talking about skirmishes anymore. This is a full-blown war, right? And if I remember correctly, this one got really expensive for the U.S. government.
It was the longest and most expensive of all the Indian Wars for the U.S., lasting from 1835 to 1842.
Wow.
What makes it even more significant is that over 300 enslaved people joined forces with the Black Seminoles, demonstrating the collective yearning for liberation that fueled this resistance.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about pushing back against encroaching settlers. It was a fight for Black freedom on a massive scale.
That's an incredible testament to the power of shared struggle and the unwavering pursuit of liberty. They risked everything to join this fight for freedom. Who were some of the figures leading this resistance?
On the Seminole side, you have Osceola, a legendary warrior and brilliant strategist. And for the Black Seminoles, you have John Horse, also known as Abraham, a leader who was equally skilled in military tactics and diplomacy.
Right.
He was a powerful symbol of Black resistance and emerges as a pivotal figure in this war.
John Horse, what a name. Just the name itself sounds powerful. To lead a rebellion of that magnitude against the U.S. Army, you've got to have an incredible amount of courage and strategic thinking.
Absolutely.
What was his impact on the war?
John Horse and the Black Seminoles were relentless. They fought with everything they had, and their impact on the U.S. Army was enormous.
Right.
The war ended up costing the U.S. government more than they had ever spent on a war before.
Wow.
Even more than they would.
John Horse led the Black Seminoles in battle. See, the British wanted to capture the Seminoles and put them back in captivity, to put them back in slavery. But the Black Seminoles fought against that, said, we're not going back into slavery. They fought. So the Black Seminoles fought. Not only did the Black Seminoles fight in America, they went to Mexico and they fought in Mexico. They helped Mexico to defend their borders against the British. So the Black Seminoles put in work in the United States of America, and they put in work in Mexico. They were soldiers. They were riders. The Black Seminoles in Mexico today celebrate Juneteenth because they have direct blood ties to FBA runaway slaves who came together with the natives and created the tribe called Black Seminoles. John Horse, a black man, led the Black Seminoles in battle against the British.
John Horse, he was a powerful symbol of black resistance and emerges as a pivotal figure in this war.
John Horse, what a name. Just the name itself sounds powerful. To lead a rebellion of that magnitude against the U.S. Army, you've got to have an incredible amount of courage and strategic thinking.
Absolutely.
What was his impact on the war?
John Horse and the Black Seminoles were relentless. They fought with everything they had, and their impact on the U.S. Army was enormous.
Right.
The war ended up costing the U.S. government more than they had ever spent on a war before.
Wow.
Even more than they would spend later until the Vietnam War.
Wow.
Think about that.
This is clearly not just a footnote in history. The Black Seminoles were a force to be reckoned with, and they made the U.S. government pay a hefty price for trying to crush them. But how did this war finally end? What happened to John Horse and the other Black Seminoles who had fought so valiantly for their freedom?
Like so many stories of black liberation, this one is marked by both triumph and heartbreak. John Horse knew they couldn't win a decisive victory against the U.S. Army.
Right.
So he made a calculated decision. He negotiated a surrender.
Surrender. That must have been an incredibly difficult decision for someone who had dedicated his life to fighting for freedom. What were the terms?
It was a gamble, but a strategic one. John Horse laid down...
See, Mexicans thought that black people just took beatings and there were no slave rebellions because they don't know anything about history. They got that conquistador knowledge when it comes to history. Now, Mexicans who are educated, they know the truth, but excuse me. Unfortunately, you got a lot of Mexicans who don't understand this history. There were plenty slave rebellions. Nat Turner did a slave rebellion where they went from plantation to plantation, unaliving slave masters, burning down these plantations. They had to send in, the United States had to send in a whole army to go after Nat Turner and the runaway slaves who was riding with him. Unfortunately, Nat Turner didn't make it to Florida. Now, the runaway slaves who made it to Florida, they're the ones who created the Black Seminole tribe along with the natives. They blend their communities together. They got married. They had children. They shared ideas about agriculture and farming and warfare. See, the foundational Black Americans who went to Florida, some of them they understood English. So they understood the tactics of the English. This is why when the Spanish said, okay, if you guys can come down here to Florida and assist us, then you guys can have your freedom. We won't let the British come down here and capture you. You just got to help us fight against them. And that's exactly what the runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina did, because most of your Black Seminoles, most of your foundational Black Americans that was runaway slaves who ran to Florida, the majority of them came from Georgia and South Carolina, and they went down to Florida. And then eventually you had Black Seminoles who found their way down to Mexico. So when Sonny said, oh man, the Black Seminoles ain't FBA, that's the dumbest thing that I ever heard. The runaway slaves and the native Seminoles, they created that whole tribe together. That's why when you look up, listen, if you go to South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida today, you still have descendants of Black Seminoles who live there today. You got Black people who are dark skinned. Some of them have long and wavy hair. That's because they're a mixture of FBA people and the natives that was on that land. So you got a lot of Black Seminoles who still exist today, the descendants of Black Seminoles in the southeast region of the United States. But when you're ignorant of history, you say foolish things.
His arms, and it was marked by both triumph and heartbreak. John Horse knew they couldn't win a decisive victory against the U.S. Army.
Right.
So he made a calculated decision. He negotiated a surrender.
Surrender. That must have been an incredibly difficult decision for someone who had dedicated his life to fighting for freedom. What were the terms?
It was a gamble, but a strategic one. John Horse laid down his arms in exchange for something incredibly valuable, emancipation papers for himself and every single one of his soldiers.
Wow.
It seemed like a victory at the time, but there was a catch.
Well.
The U.S. government insisted that they relocate to Oklahoma, joining other tribes on what we now know as the Trail of Tears.
The Trail of Tears. a horrific chapter in American history marked by unimaginable suffering and loss. I can't even begin to imagine the heartbreak of being forced from your homeland after fighting so hard for your right to be there.
It was a devastating journey filled with unimaginable hardship, but the Black Seminoles, with their unwavering resilience, endured the trek, clinging to the hope that Oklahoma would be a place where they could finally live in peace and freedom.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that hope was about to be shattered. It's a tragic pattern in American history, isn't it? This cycle of broken promises, especially when it comes to Black freedom. Even after enduring the Trail of Tears, the Black Seminoles' freedom was far from secure.
It's heartbreaking how often we see that pattern repeat itself.
Yeah.
Promises made and then broken, especially when Black lives are at stake. So
only 5% of the Africans, listen, only 5% of African slaves came to the United States. So it shows you that they were already blacks here in the Americas, because we only got 5% of the African slaves. The majority of your African slaves during the transatlantic slave trade, the majority of them went to Brazil and Latin America. The United States got the smallest percentage of slaves. That is a known fact. You can't expect you can never expect for a Spanish conquistador to be honest about history. Only a small percentage of African slaves came to the United States. Only like 5% of them came to the United States. You already had Black indigenous tribes that was in the Americas prior to the Europeans showing up. This is why even in Mexico today, you have Afro-indigenous people. They're recognized as Afro-indigenous because the true Mexicans, the true Mexican scholars have did studies. The true Mexican scholars have did studies on this as well. And they say, well, hold on, we had Black Aboriginals here prior to any Europeans showing up. Now, of course, the Spanish conquistadors brought African slaves with them, but you already had a Black population that existed prior to the Spanish conquistadors showing up to Mexico. And on top of that, you had the Black Seminoles from the United States who fled to Mexico. So you had different groups of Black people. You got Black Aboriginals in Mexico. You got Black slaves that came with the Spanish conquistadors, and you have Black Seminoles who fled to Mexico when they had their issues with the British, when Mexico said, okay, if you Black Seminoles come to Mexico and defend our borders, you guys can have your freedom as long as you help us to defend these borders. And that's exactly what the Black Seminoles did when they fled to Mexico. This is why Juneteenth is even celebrated in Mexico, because of the Black Seminoles who fled to Mexico to assist the Mexican government at their borders, to keep the British out of their country. Just like you got different tribes of natives, you have different tribes of Black people.
what happened when they arrived in Oklahoma?
Well, it was more of a legalistic betrayal.
Okay.
The U.S. Attorney General at the time, Nathan Clifford, essentially declared that the government didn't have the authority to grant them freedom in the first place.
Wait, what? After everything they'd endured, escaping slavery, fighting for their freedom, surviving the Trail of Tears, their emancipation was just revoked.
Yeah.
How could the U.S. government do that?
It exposed the fragility of their freedom.
Right?
The deep-seated racism within the U.S. government. They were basically told they were never truly free.
Right.
And now they face the threat of being re-enslaved.
I can only imagine the feeling of utter betrayal, the sense of having nowhere to turn but knowing the Black Seminoles.
And a lot of Mexicans don't even know that the Black Moors ruled Spain for centuries. A lot of Spanish people got African blood. Why does Spain have African blood? Because the Moors ruled Portugal and Spain at one particular time. And we're going back to the 1200s, the 1300s. Going all the way back to the 1200s and the 1300s, the Moors from North Africa dominated Europe. The Moors ruled Spain for centuries. The Moors were already going back and forth to the Americas because they ruled Spain for centuries. That is how the Spanish learned how to sail the Atlantic Ocean. They learned how to sail the Atlantic Ocean from the Black Moors, who dominated and conquered Europe. That's how the Spanish knew how to navigate the Atlantic, because the Black Moors, not only did the Black Moors rule Europe, they taught them a lot of things. The Black Moors brought civilization to Europe. So the Spanish learned from the Black Moors, and when when the Spanish eventually kicked the black Moors out of Europe and they took their country back over, they sailed the world to look for new land and opportunities. But keep in mind, the black Moors ruled Spain and Europe and different parts of Europe for centuries. So a lot of Spanish people already got African DNA in them, just because when the Moors ruled it, they slept with the women. They conquered Spain for centuries. So the Spaniards learned how to navigate the Atlantic Ocean. They learned that from the black Moors who ruled Spain for centuries. But when you don't understand who the Moors are, you don't get that. The black Moors ruled Spain and Europe prior to the transatlantic slave trade. So the black Moors already left their fingerprints and their way of living in Europe prior to any of this transatlantic slave trade. The black Moors were already going back and forth to the Americas before the Europeans ever decided to get on a boat and travel the world. The black Moors was already doing that. Now, one thing I can say about the Spanish is they learned a lot from the black Moors, and they took a lot of that knowledge and they used a lot of that knowledge to colonize and conquer different lands across the world. So the Spanish actually soaked up a lot of game from the black Moors that once ruled Spain. I'm giving you historical facts. Make sure that you guys bless the like button. I appreciate everybody who's blessing the super chat.
To grant them freedom in the first place.
Wait, what? After everything they'd endured, escaping slavery, fighting for their freedom, surviving the Trail of Tears, their emancipation was just revoked.
Yeah.
How could the U.S. government do that?
It exposed the fragility of their freedom.
Right?
The deep-seated racism within the U.S. government. They were basically told they were never truly free.
Right.
And now they face the threat of being re-enslaved.
I can only imagine the feeling of utter betrayal. The sense of having nowhere to turn, but knowing the black Seminoles, they weren't going to just sit back.
Yeah. Mexicans don't even know that black Moors ruled Spain and conquered Spain. Now, one dude tried to say, oh, no, those weren't black people. Those were Arabs. They do anything in their power to rewrite the history. Yes, you had some Moors who were Arab, but a lot of Arabs were black. But also these were blacks in North Africa who ruled Spain, and they ruled Spain for centuries. They didn't even know that black people ruled Spain and parts of Europe for centuries. 90% of Mexicans don't even know that. And this is way before the transatlantic slave trade took place. Blacks were ruling Spain and parts of Europe in the 1200s, in the 1300s, in the 1100s.
And accept this injustice, were they?
Absolutely not. They had fought too hard, sacrificed too much. John Horse and Wildcat, another prominent leader.
If you report my channel, you're getting blocked because there's no reason to report the channel. Only a snitch and a crybaby would report my channel. You got the spirit of snitchery and snitching in you if you want to report this channel because you got timed out for saying something crazy.
Realized they couldn't trust the U.S. government.
Right.
They had to find a place where they could truly be free.
This is where the story takes another incredible turn, right?
Yeah.
Facing the prospect of re-enslavement in the land that had promised them freedom,
yeah,
they set their sights on Mexico.
Mexico had abolished slavery years earlier.
Right.
And was
exactly. The original Arabs were black. But if you ask Mexicans today, most Mexicans don't even know that Juneteenth is celebrated in Mexico by the black Seminoles who still live in Mexico. That's why Juneteenth is celebrated in Mexico. They don't know that, though, because they don't understand history. A lot of Mexicans didn't even know that black people ruled Spain for centuries prior to the transatlantic slave trade. A lot of Mexicans don't know that. The Spanish learned everything from the Moors who ruled Spain for centuries. The Moors was already selling the world. But I get a Spanish credit. Now, this is where I get a Spanish credit. They soaked up a lot of game from the Moors, and then they sold the world and they conquered different lands based on the knowledge that they learned from the black Moors that once ruled Spain for centuries. And not just Spain, other parts of Europe like Portugal and many other places.
As a beacon of hope for those fleeing bondage in the United States. John Horse and Wildcat started planning a daring escape, a mass exodus to Mexico.
A mass exodus to Mexico.
Yeah.
This is getting epic.
Yeah.
It must have been an incredibly dangerous journey, especially back then. We're talking hundreds of miles through unforgiving terrain, right?
Remember, these were people who had survived the Trail of Tears?
Right.
They were skilled in survival in navigating difficult landscapes.
Mm-hmm.
And they were driven by an unyielding desire for freedom in 1850. They embarked on this incredible 6-month journey,
Wow.
facing countless perils along the way.
6 months? That's almost unimaginable walking, I presume. No horses, no wagons, just sheer determination propelling them forward, knowing that freedom was on the other side of that border.
Many of them were on foot, yes. Think about the mental and physical fortitude it took to keep going day after day, mile after mile, with families, elders, children in tow.
Right.
It's a testament to their collective resilience.
And when they finally reached Mexico, did they find the freedom they had so desperately sought?
They did. Mexico not only welcomed them with open arms,
Wow.
but granted them land autonomy.
Right.
And the right to govern their own communities. They found a place where they could truly be free.
It's a powerful reminder that the fight for Black freedom wasn't confined to the borders of the United States. There were other places, other possibilities, other nations willing to embrace those fleeing oppression. But why was Mexico so receptive to them? I mean, it's great that they abolished slavery, but was there more to it?
Well, Mexico had its own set of challenges at the time. They were dealing with raids from Apache and Comanche tribes along their northern border. And ironically, they were also worried about the United States expanding its territory further south.
So the Black Seminoles, with their reputation as fierce and skilled warriors, arrived at the perfect time. They were seen as valuable allies.
Right.
Capable of defending the very border that separated them from the nation that had betrayed them.
You got it. They were granted land in the state of Coahuila.
Okay.
You got an idiot in the comment section who said the Moors never ruled anything. This proves how ignorant people are to history. The Moors ruled Spain for centuries. But I can't expect a Spanish conquistador will never be honest about that. I mean, some of them will, but a lot of them won't be honest. The Black Seminoles went to Mexico and assisted Mexico at their borders. The Black Seminoles were runaway slaves. These were foundational Black Americans who fled to Florida when Florida was still under Spanish rule. Because at that particular time, the Spanish was at odds with the British. And at one particular time, Florida was not considered a part of the United States. It was ruled by the Spanish. The British wanted that territory, so they were fighting against the Spanish to take over that Florida territory. So Spain told the blacks, the slaves, if you guys can make it to Florida, we'll protect you as long as you guys help protect our borders against these British who are encroaching on our territory. So a lot of runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina fled to Florida. And they created a tribe down there with the natives who were in Florida. They created a tribe and called it the Black Seminoles. They intermixed, they got married, they had babies, they created a whole new civilization and called it the Black Seminoles. These were foundational Black Americans, runaway slaves who fled to Florida, who mixed and mingled and had babies with the Seminoles that was already in Florida. And they brought it all together. So, you know, we're going to call ourselves the Black Seminoles. That's how it happened. But see, when you don't understand history, you say, the FBAs ain't Black Seminoles. If it wasn't for FBA, there would be no such thing as Black Seminoles. There would be Seminoles, but there would be no such thing as Black Seminoles if it wasn't for the runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina fleeing to Florida. Then they created this tribe together with the Seminoles. So they said, okay, we're the Black Seminoles. They created a whole civilization. They had their own villages. So when I heard this clown say, FBA people ain't Black Seminoles, I said, man, it is crazy that this guy is that old and he's just so he's so uneducated when it comes to history. You got Black Seminoles in Mexico. Black Seminoles in Mexico celebrate Juneteenth because they have direct ties to foundational Black Americans. You got runaway slaves who went to Mexico. I just showed you the video of the Black Seminoles in Mexico, and they pay homage to their FBA roots as runaway slaves who fled to Mexico. They pay homage to their roots, and this is why they celebrate Juneteenth in Mexico. It's amazing that you got people who are this ignorant in 2026.
in a town called Nacimiento in exchange for helping to protect the border, and they did so with their characteristic bravery and skill, quickly establishing themselves as a force to be reckoned with.
Talk about a plot twist. The people who had been betrayed and cast aside by the U.S. government ended up defending another nation's border against, wait for it, the U.S. But the story doesn't end there, does it? There's another layer to this. Something about them working with the U.S. Army later on.
The Muskogos as well. The Muskogos in Mexico are black people. That's a fact. You got the Black Seminoles and Muskogos in Mexico who celebrate Juneteenth, and we all know that Juneteenth is an FBA holiday. So the Black Seminoles are direct descendants of FBA who were runaway slaves.
The story takes yet another ironic turn.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here. What happened?
Remember, after the Civil War and Emancipation, the U.S. Army created all-black regiments?
Yeah.
The Buffalo Soldiers to fight in the West. They were tasked with subduing Native American tribes, expanding U.S. control over those territories. And guess who they turned to for help?
Don't tell me the Black Seminole.
You got it. In 1870, the U.S. Army approached John Horse.
Wow.
And asked him to enlist Black Seminoles as scouts to help them fight against Native Americans. They knew about their reputation as skilled trackers.
Right.
Their knowledge of the terrain and their military prowess.
And of course, they probably dangled the promise of repatriation, right? The chance to finally return to their homeland, the land that was stolen from them.
You know, the drill, the U.S. government once again made promises, offered land and provisions if they agreed to help. And despite everything they had endured, despite the broken promises of the past, some Black Seminoles led by John Horse agreed to serve.
What a complex decision that must have been, to fight for the very nation that had betrayed them time and again. I imagine there was a mix of hope, skepticism, maybe even a sense of irony in that decision.
It's a complicated chapter in their story, but what's undeniable is that the Black Seminole Indian Scouts served with distinction. They were known for their bravery, their tracking skills, their effectiveness in battle, and they earned high honors for their service.
But did they ever receive the repatriation they were promised?
Yeah.
Did they ever get to return to their homeland in Florida?
Sadly, no. The U.S. government, true to form, broke yet another promise.
Right.
They served their time, they risked their lives, they helped the U.S. Army achieve its goals.
Oh, right.
But when it was all over, they were cast aside, discharged from the Army with no land, no provisions, and no return to their homeland.
It's a story that underscores the systemic racism and hypocrisy that have plagued Black people in America for centuries. Even acts of heroism and sacrifice were often met with betrayal and injustice. So what became of them after their service?
Did they stay in the U.S.?
Some did. A group of them ended up settling in Brackettville, Texas.
Okay.
But the story of the Black Seminoles goes beyond borders of the United States. Remember, there were those who had escaped.
Yeah, man, it's so hard for them to understand that, you know, they blended their cultures. The runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina, when they went to Florida, they linked up with the Seminoles and they blended their cultures. They were the Seminoles that was in Florida was fighting against the white man. So when the runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina fled to Florida, they formed an alliance because they both had a common enemy. And who was the common enemy? The British white man. So they came together and created the Black Seminoles. They shared knowledge of farming, agriculture, language, and many different things. So the Black runaway slaves and the Seminoles came together and created their own civilization, and they called it the Black Seminoles. Black Seminoles are direct descendants of FBA, who were runaway slaves who went to Florida in the first place to even create that tribe together. No, man, the Black Seminoles ain't FBA. What? I know you hate the truth, man, and the truth is eating you up, man. Sonny over there punching the air, just like a lot of conquistadors are drunk, punching the air, windmilling because they hate it when I give these historical facts. There was no such thing as a Black Seminole prior to the Black people prior to the Black people from South Carolina and Georgia going to Florida, because like I said, Spain ruled Florida. Florida was not a part of the United States back in the day. Florida became a part of the United States later on when Spain decided to sell Florida to the British. Now, once Spain sold Florida to the British, that's when Florida became a part of the United States. And that's when the Black Seminoles had a bigger problem.
escaped to Mexico earlier,
Right.
establishing a
Because
vibrant
once Spain sold Florida, now the British were able to come into Florida, but guess what? The Black Seminoles still put up a fight. The Black Seminoles went to war because the Black Seminoles said, we're not going back into captivity. We're not going back into slavery. We're going to go to war about this. We're going to die about this. And that's exactly what they did. They went to war because they said, we're not going to be removed from our land. The British said, hey, man, if you guys go to Oklahoma and leave Florida, then you guys will have freedom. But it was a trick bag. They wanted to take the land. And then once the Black Seminoles got to Oklahoma, there was a whole new set of rules because white supremacists always find a way to write something in law in the Constitution to keep their foot on your neck so that you can't make progress. Some Black Seminoles went to Oklahoma. Some of them said, nah, we're not leaving. We're going to stay here and fight. Some of them fled to Mexico. Some of them stayed in Florida. You got Black Seminoles who moved all across the country. Some of them stayed in Florida and fought. Some of them left and fled to Mexico and assisted Mexico in their fight against the British at those borders. True story.
community there, and their descendants still live in Mexico today. There are Black Seminoles in Mexico today. That's incredible. It shows even acts of heroism and sacrifice were often met with betrayal and injustice. So what became of them after their service?
Did they stay in the U.S.?
Some did. A group of them ended up settling in Bracketville, Texas.
Okay.
But the story of the Black Seminoles goes beyond the borders of the United States. Remember, there were those who had escaped to Mexico earlier,
Right.
establishing a vibrant community there, and their descendants still live in Mexico today. There are Black Seminoles in Mexico today. That's incredible. It shows the reach of the African diaspora, how Black folks created communities and found freedom in unexpected places. But do they still hold on to their cultural identity, their connection to their ancestors?
Absolutely. They've preserved their unique culture and traditions, even celebrating Juneteenth in Mexico.
Wow.
Which is just remarkable. It's a testament to the enduring legacy of the Black Seminoles, their unwavering commitment to freedom and remembrance.
Juneteenth in Mexico.
Oh.
That's powerful. I've never heard of that before. This whole story has been a revelation, highlighting a part of Black history that deserves to be told and retold.
It challenges us to expand our understanding of Black history, to recognize the diverse paths to freedom that Black folks forged throughout the Americas. It's a story that resonates deeply with the ongoing struggle for racial justice and equality.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Their story, it isn't just about the past, it's about the present. It's a reminder that the fight for freedom and equality is far from over. What's striking to me is that even after centuries, the themes of resilience and the pursuit of liberation continue to resonate.
You're absolutely right. The Black Seminoles story, it serves as a powerful call to action, reminding us that we must constantly challenge the systems that perpetuate inequality and injustice. Their unwavering resilience and determination should serve as a beacon, inspiring us to push for a world where justice and equality are a reality for all.
Their story also underscores the beauty and strength that come from cultural blending, showcasing the richness.
The Black Seminoles was created from cultural blending. That's what happened. The Seminoles were in Florida, and the Seminoles that were in Florida were already runaways because, like I said, some of your native tribes assimilated to white, with white culture. They said, okay, we'll help you to enslave these Black people. But you had a lot of native tribes who said, we're not with that. So the native tribes who fled to Florida when Florida was under Spain rule, they were runaways, they were renegades. And when the blacks, when the runaway slaves went to Florida, they linked up together and created their own community, created their own tribe, and they labeled it, we're the Black Seminoles. Because Black people was at war with the British. They wanted to escape British colonies, so they went to Florida to escape the British colonies, because Florida was owned by Spain at that time. And the natives who were in Florida, they did the same thing. The natives that was in Florida, they wanted to escape the British colonies as well. So the natives that was in Florida and the runaway slaves from Georgia who went to Florida, they created their own society. They created their own community. They created their own tribe, and that is the Black Seminoles. Now, when Spain sold Florida and the British took over, that's when a lot of your Black Seminoles fled to different places because they was trying to escape warfare. But a lot of them stayed in Florida and went to war and fought for it because they said, we're not going back into slavery. We're not going back into captivity. So a lot of those black Seminoles fled to Mexico because Mexico said, damn, you guys are warriors. You've been putting up a fight against the British. Why don't you come to Mexico and help defend our borders, and we'll give you guys land and freedom. So that's why so many black Seminoles went to Mexico, because they assisted Mexico. Okay, we'll help y'all to defend y'all borders against the European as long as you guys give us freedom and you give us some land. So that's exactly what happened. This is why Juneteenth is still celebrated today from the Black Seminole and the Muskogee community in Mexico.
Diversity brings to any society. The Black Seminoles, they didn't just adopt traditions. They created something entirely new and vibrant through the fusion of African and indigenous cultures.
That's an essential point. It wasn't simply assimilation, but a deliberate and dynamic process of weaving together their African heritage with the traditions of their Seminole allies, resulting in a unique and powerful cultural identity. And that legacy continues to thrive today, not just in the Juneteenth celebrations in Mexico, but in the descendants of the Black Seminoles who are keeping the memory and spirit of their ancestors alive.
It's incredible to think that after facing so much adversity, their cultural identity has not only survived, but flourished. Looking back at this extraordinary journey, what lessons can we learn from the Black Seminoles? What wisdom can we carry with us today?
Their story is a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome even the most daunting obstacles. They faced betrayal, broken promises, and constant threats, yet they never surrendered their hope for a better future. It's a powerful reminder that resilience is not just about enduring hardship, but about maintaining hope and continuing to strive for a better tomorrow, no matter the odds.
And their story reminds us that unity can be an incredible force for change. The Black Seminoles and the Seminoles recognized that their shared values and common goals outweighed their differences, and in that unity, they found the strength to resist oppression.
Their story is a beacon of self-determination, reminding us that true freedom is not granted but fought for. They carved their own path, refusing to accept the limitations imposed upon them by a society that sought to dehumanize them. The Black Seminoles were pioneers, innovators, and visionaries, and their legacy should inspire us to challenge the status quo and fight for a world where everyone has the opportunity to live in freedom and dignity.
The story of the Black Seminoles has been an eye-opening journey, a powerful reminder that history is full of untold stories, stories of resilience, courage, and the...
So there you go. Now, Vincent Guerrero abolished slavery in Mexico.
Meet the Afro-Mexicans of Los Angeles.
A black man in Mexico, Vincent Guerrero, nicknamed El Negro, he abolished slavery in Mexico. Gaspar Yanga was an African slave. I guess he was brought over from Africa because, like I said, you had blacks that were in Mexico, but you also had the Spanish who brought blacks to Mexico as well. Now, Gaspar Yanga was a slave from, he was from the Congo of Africa, but he was brought to Mexico. And when he came to Mexico, he helped Mexico in a war against the Spanish. Gaspar Yanga played a major role in helping Mexico to gain their independence from Spain. Vincent Guerrero, El Negro, the second president of Mexico, a black man, he the one who abolished slavery in Mexico. Vincent Guerrero was fighting so that melanated, dark-skinned people in Mexico would have the same civil rights as the white-looking people in Mexico had. And he was assassinated for that as well. Right after Vincent Guerrero abolished slavery in Mexico, Vincent Guerrero, El Negro, when he abolished slavery, he was assassinated maybe like 2 years later, or right after he abolished slavery in Mexico, he was assassinated by white European Mexicans in Mexico. The Spaniard-looking Europeans, the Spanish-looking, the white-looking Spaniard Mexicans in Mexico, they assassinated Vincent Guerrero because he was fighting for the rights of black and melanated people in Mexico. He didn't want blacks in Mexico to remain an underclass, so that's why he abolished slavery, and he continued to fight for the civil rights of melanated dark people in Mexico. That's why they assassinated El Negro, Vincent Guerrero. So most Mexicans will never admit that it was a black man who abolished slavery in Mexico.
To connect the adapter to it.
Heidi and Maria Irra run Malena, an Afro-Mexican restaurant in LA. The sisters make estimate is a community of about a couple hundred Afro-Mexicans in Los Angeles.
I think it's a bloodline of Lorenzo's.
Lorenzo is their mom's maiden name. Maria Elena Lorenzo immigrated to Los Angeles in the 90s from an area known as Costa Chica Guerrero in Mexico.
That whole strip of Mexico, we look different. We have curly hair, black curly hair. Not me, but my sisters. They took on the trait of the Afro, indigenous culture.
It's estimated there are more than 3.1 million Afro-Mexicans, or people of African descent, in Mexico. They've been a part of the country's fabric since the 1500s, but if you look in the history books, you'll have a...
Now, he said they've been a part of Mexico since the 1500s, right? No. There's studies and tests to reveal that blacks were in Mexico prior to the 1500s. But he said that they were in Mexico, in the 1500s, but there's evidence to prove that they were in Mexico prior to the 1500s, right? This is a known fact. This is why the blacks in Mexico have Afro-Indigenous. This is why they're called Afro-Indigenous. Because a lot of these blacks in Mexico did not come from Africa. Some of them did, but some of them didn't. Just like in the United States of America, you got black people who came from Africa, but not all black people in the United States of America came from Africa. They only 5% of the slaves during the transatlantic slave trade came to the United States. The overwhelming majority of African slaves went to Latin America, not the United States. Only 5% of the African slaves were brought to the United States. So how did the black population get so big in the United States? Because you had black aboriginals, and plus they brought a small percentage of black Africans, and they mixed together, and that is what it is. Do you know that a lot of native tribes got reclassified as Negro because of the Europeans' caste system? A lot of your native, indigenous, aboriginal people were reclassified as Negro. The Europeans are the ones who created that. Prior to the Europeans showing up, there was no such thing as that. These were just native aboriginal people. But when the Europeans came, so you guys are Negro. So they reclassified a lot of these native people and just called them Negro. So when you call somebody a Negro, that gives you the right to enslave them. That's why they fought so hard to call them Negro, because they wanted the right to enslave them. This is why a lot of this history is in muddy waters. A lot of this history is in the fall because the Europeans did it on purpose. Let's call everybody dark-skinned Negro. So a lot of the black aboriginal people that was here, they got reclassified as Negro, when in reality they was already here before the Europeans showed up.
Hard time finding them.
Most of the researchers focus on the dichotomy of the Spaniards and the indigenous community.
All right, let's go to this right here, because see, this right here is going to make a lot of people mad. But then again, listen, this goes against their indoctrination.
If you've ever visited Mexico, you'll have noticed that you see the same names everywhere. Benito Juárez, José María Morelos, Miguel Hidalgo, and
Shout out to Trinity for the Cash App. Shout out to Desmond Hill for blessing us with a Cash App. Bless the Cash App. We got 600 plus people watching, 600 people rocking. Bless the Cash App and send a super chat for some of this dope game. I'm giving you the historical facts that most people want to run away from. A black man in Mexico abolished slavery. That is a fact. Gaspar Yanga defeated the Spanish in several battles in southern Mexico. Black folks played a major role in Mexico gaining their independence from Spain, because Gaspar Yanga and his army, because keep in mind, Gaspar Yanga wasn't by himself. Gaspar Yanga had an army of soldiers that fought with him, and they fought in battle to defeat the Spanish. So blacks, not only did the black Seminoles defend Mexico's borders against the British, the blacks that was in southern Mexico fought against Spanish, defeated the Spanish in several battles. So you got blacks from the United States, which were the black Seminoles that assisted Mexico. Then you had the black Africans who came from Africa, like Gaspar Yanga and his soldiers. They defended Mexico against Spain. Now, when it comes to the Aztecs, no, the Aztecs are not FBA. I'm not saying that FBA people are Aztecs. What I'm saying is the Aztecs were dark-skinned, melanated people. Just like you got different tribes of black people. Not all black people are the same. Now, the black Seminoles are FBA. The Aztecs are not FBA, but don't get it twisted for 1 second. The Aztecs were dark-skinned, melanated people. They didn't have Spanish conquistador blood. The Mayans, the Aztecs, The Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Olmecs, none of them had European blood. None of them had Spanish conquistador blood. The Mexicans that you see today have Spanish conquistador blood. You know, just because you're Mexican don't mean that you have a direct connection to Aztecs. That's not true. That's like African people. Africans are not foundational Black Americans, just like foundational Black Americans are not Africans. It's a different culture. It's a different, the cultures are different. You had different indigenous tribes in Mexico, but of course, most Mexicans want to tell you that I'm Aztec when that's the furthest thing from the truth. A lot of Mexicans have no blood ties to the Aztecs because why? There was different indigenous tribes in Mexico. There were different tribes all over Mexico. Just like you got different African tribes in Africa. All Africans are not the same. The indigenous tribes of Mexico, they're not all the same. They had different cultures and different languages. So to call yourself an Aztec just because you're Mexican is ridiculous. We all know that the Aztecs did not have Spanish European blood at all. Now, you might have some Mexicans with some ties to the Aztecs, but it just depends. Not all Mexicans have direct blood ties to the Aztecs civilization. They just don't. Not all of them. Some of them, but not all of them. A lot of these Mexicans that you see in America, the United States, they have majority European Spanish blood. Most of their bloodline comes from Europe, the Spanish conquistadors. So if the majority, if you like 40 to 50% Spanish conquistador, you're not an Aztec. Your bloodline comes from Europe. You might have, you know, some indigenous in you, but there's no guarantee that your indigenous blood is connected to the Aztecs. Because like I said, there were different indigenous tribes all over Mexico. Different languages and different cultures. They want to make it seem like everybody from Mexico was Aztecs when no, that's not true.
Many more. These Mexican heroes shaped Mexico's history, and as a result, buildings, streets, schools.
The Mayans, the Aztecs, and the Olmecs did not have Spanish European blood. They did not.
Even entire states have been named in their honor. The state of Guerrero, home to Acapulco on Mexico's Pacific coast, is one of these states which take its name from a hero of Mexican independence, Vicente Guerrero. As his name suggests, Guerrero was a fierce general whose leadership in battle was key to Mexico achieving its independence in 1821, and 8 years later, he became the president of the new republic. And one thing that makes him particularly remarkable is the fact that he was of African descent. That's right. 180 years before our neighbor to the north, the United States elected the first African-American president, Barack Obama. Mexico has its own African-Mexican president. You can see this name all around you in Mexico. This primary school that's behind me is called Vicente Guerrero, as well as the state in which he was born. At a time when people of African descent were toiling as slaves all across the Americas, what made Mexico so progressive to have a black president? I've been doing some research and I want to tell you what I found. I'm not an expert, so as always, I want to read your comments, and if you have more information, please feel free to add it below. Please take a look at those because
Mexicans will never tell you that a black man abolished slavery in Mexico. They'll never tell you that because they refuse to admit the truth. They don't want to give a black man credit, but we don't need them to give us credit. History is on our side. I'm giving you the receipts. I'm giving you the irrefutable facts. So I don't need you to give us props. History proves what I'm saying.
We'll have more reliable information. Much like other parts of the Americas at the time, at the beginning of the 19th century, the Spanish colony, which was to become Mexico, was in a picture of racial harmony. A caste system existed in the colony which determined a person's social standing based on their race. and how far their bloodline was removed from the pure blood of the Spaniards. As you can see from this image from the time, there were several divisions from Español to Mestizo, to Cautizo, to Mulatto, Indio, Moro, and more. Being of African descent, Vicente Guerrero was considered to belong to a low caste. He didn't merit the same privileges or the same rights as the Spanish-born elite, and even lower than the indigenous people here in Mexico. Vicente Guerrero began his military career as the struggle for Mexican independence was starting in 1810. Actually, everything started here in the city where I'm living, in Querétaro, but that's a story for another video. Soon, the independence leader, José María Morelos, commissioned Vicente Guerrero to take charge of the independence in the mountains of southern Mexico. Spanish government, in an attempt to placate those struggling for independence, created a radically progressive constitution in 1812. It was called La Constitución de Cádiz. From now on, those born in the Americas would be granted the same status to the Spaniards. Now, I'm telling you this because what I'm about to say is gonna make a lot of sense. Following the introduction of this reform, the viceroy in charge told Vicente Guerrero to drop arms, stop his revolutionary movements, and swear allegiance to the Constitution. On receiving this offer from the viceroy, Vicente Guerrero refused this offer, and here
over the years they created images of Vincent Guerrero to lighten up his skin. That's how these conquistadors are known to lie about history. The man was way darker than that, but the images that you see, they gave you these images of him on purpose to whiten up his skin, to take away the contributions of black people. Vincent Guerrero, his nickname was El Negro because he was of African black descent. A black man in Mexico abolished slavery. Blacks in Mexico played a major role in Mexico gaining their independence from Spain. Gaspar Yanga defeated the Spanish in several battles in southern Mexico. That's why they named the whole city after Yanga. They named the city after Guerrero. These were Afro-Mexicans who fought against the Spanish.
Comes the most interesting part. The new constitution didn't abolish slavery and explicitly excluded those from African descent from citizenship, although it did include a clause permitting them an open door to the virtue and merit of citizenship if they provided a worthy service to the fatherland. Obviously, this wasn't acceptable to Vicente Guerrero, who kept fighting until Mexico was independent in 1821. So finally,
right, Vincent Guerrero fought for Mexicans' independence and he abolished slavery. But they don't never want to give a black man credit, but when you understand history, they can't lie to you.
People were independent from Spain, but Mexico didn't have any experience about how to run a country. So
Listen, Spanish conquistadors, they rewrite history and they lie about history. Vincent Guerrero, his nickname was El Negro. Why you think his nickname was El Negro? Why you think he fought so that black people in Mexico could have the rights that they have? Vincent Guerrero was the one that fought to help Mexico to gain their independence from Spain, and he abolished slavery. It's a shame that you got people who claim to be Mexican who don't know this and who don't know about Gaspar Yanga. They refuse to admit that Gaspar Yanga defeated the Spanish in several battles because Gaspar Yanga had his own soldiers, and they would fight in several battles to defeat the Spanish. They named a city in Mexico after Yanga in his honor because Gaspar Yanga played a major role in Mexico gaining their independence from Spain, the conquistadors. So did Vincent Guerrero, also known as El Negro.
They agreed that the organization of the country would be a constitutional monarchy. So the Mexican Empire was founded and ruled by an emperor, Agustín de Iturbide. One may think this was bad for Vicente's ideas, but actually he signed a pact with the emperor called El Plan de Iguala, which declared that Mexico is totally independent as well as guaranteeing.
You got a lot of Spanish conquistadors in the comment section right now. See, this truth right here, these historical facts goes against their indoctrination. not their education. The facts goes against their indoctrination. These are Spanish conquistadors, man.
The same rights to diverse social groups, including those of African descent. There's a lot of history during these times. Mexico was a total mess. A lot of important events happened. But let's focus on Vicente Guerrero. So I'm gonna skip 8 years in the future. In 1829, Guerrero had become a loyal warrior that a lot of people started to recognize him more and more. At this point, Guerrero had earned respect.
Shout out to my man Josh for blessing the Cash App. I appreciate you, Josh, for blessing the Cash App. Yeah. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, family.
From Mexican society. He was so popular that people made the Congress annul the newly elected president and proclaim Vicente Guerrero as the new president of Mexico. At least at that time, Mexican people knew how to stand up for themselves. Almost 4 decades before our neighbors to the north abolished slavery there, the president of Mexico had completely abolished it. He also defended Mexico from another attempt from Spain to conquer Mexico, and he promoted the agrarian reform. But the most surprising part is that he did all this in only 9 months. Some people in Mexico were so power hungry, well, some people still are, that just 9 months after being declared president, he was dead. He was betrayed. Now, there's something interesting that we can clearly see if you look Vicente Guerrero up on Google. If you look him up, you'll see several pictures of him portrayed with pale skin.
Yeah, they try to show you these pictures of him with pale skin. See, this shows you how Spanish conquistadors and Europeans in general lie, and they try their best to rewrite history. They're liars. You got a lot of conquistadors in my comment section right now. They claim to be Mexicans, but in reality, they're just Spanish conquistadors.
Portrayed with pale skin. Look Vicente Guerrero up on Google. If you look him up, you'll see several pictures of him portrayed with pale skin.
Yeah.
This is the most realistic and official painting of him. Just a quick pause to say thank you very much to my patrons for supporting this channel. Without you guys, I wouldn't be able to do some research about this topic.
Shout out to her. Hold on, let's get back.
Or traveling around Mexico. The pressure that indigenous people or black people felt at that time. He just wanted to have a fair country. At that time, they wanted to portray people as more European looking. And maybe they did.
Yeah, they wanted to portray people as more European looking, but that's that Spanish conquistador mindset. You got a lot of Spanish conquistadors in my comment section right now. Spanish conquistadors refuse to accept real history. That's why they're windmilling and trolling in my comment section.
He had pictures, and when there are so many references mentioning his dark skin, it seems that at that time they wanted to portray people as more European looking, and maybe they didn't think that having dark skin was presidential. Who knows? It's clear that he didn't care about his features. He just wanted to have a fair country. I can't imagine the pressure that indigenous people or black people felt at that time for all this idea about castes. There are even documented racial phrases he got from his.
The European looking Mexicans didn't fight for that. They wanted to maintain a system of white supremacy in Mexico. That's why it took a black man in Mexico to abolish slavery. It took blacks in Mexico to help Mexico to gain their independence from Spain. If you a white Spaniard looking Mexican, you don't need to fight for anything because the system already favors people of your complexion. They already had the complexion for the protection, so there was no need for a white-looking Mexican to fight for civil rights. That's why they had the complexion for the protection. But an Afro-Mexican, Vincent Guerrero, nicknamed El Negro, is the one that abolished slavery, is the one that helped Mexico to gain their independence from Spain, along with Gaspar Yanga and a lot of the black soldiers in Mexico who fought off the Spanish and defeated the Spanish in several battles. Blacks in Mexico played a major role in Mexico gaining their independence from Spain. The Black Seminoles who fled to Mexico defended the Mexico borders against the British who were trying to invade Mexico territory. So blacks in Mexico did a lot. They contributed to the blacks in Mexico contributed to Mexico's independence in a major way. A black man abolished slavery in Mexico. These white European looking Mexican, these Mexicans who look Spaniard, they had no reason to fight against oppression because they had the complexion for the protection. So white supremacy didn't bother them because they had the complexion for the protection. They was accepted by the Spaniard looking people who ruled Mexico. It took for the black Mexicans and the indigenous people in Mexico to fight against systematic white supremacy because melanated people in Mexico were the ones who dealt with oppression, not the white looking Mexicans with European blood. Spanish conquistador blood at that. The Mexicans who had Spanish conquistador blood who looked white, they had the complexion for the protection. So why would they fight against systematic white supremacy when the system favors people of their complexion? Come on, let's just make it make sense.
Opposition, such as efigie prieta y más gorda que un cuino, y a su persona como un hombre que debiera ser porquerizo. 2% of the population of Mexico today is recognized as Afro-descendant. For almost 2 centuries, it was the second largest group in what was then the New Spain, second only to the indigenous population. So, guys, I just want to know, did you know about this part?
See, there's a reason why white people aren't called European Americans, because white people wanted to be classified as American. They tried to convince us that we're African, so they wanted to put African American on us so that we look like foreigners, as if we ain't been in this country for centuries. But if you notice, white people don't call themselves European Americans, they just call themselves white Americans. That's why we are foundational Black Americans, because listen, foundational Black Americans, our parents didn't come from Africa, our grandparents and our great-great-grandparents didn't come from Africa. We have no ties or connections to Africa besides maybe some DNA. That's it. Now, Mexicans, they're like first and second generation American. They have direct ties to Mexico. Their parents come right over from Mexico. You meet Mexicans today, and some of their parents came over to Mexico. Some of their parents came to America illegally to have them as anchor babies so that they can get birthright citizenship. Black Americans, nobody in our family is from Africa. We can go back 4 or 5 generations and we can't find one African. That's because we've been in this country for centuries. Now, they did bring Africans to the Americas, but like I said, only 5% of Africans were brought to the United States. The overwhelming majority of Africans were taken to Latin America. Only 5% of African slaves came to the United States. That's the smallest percentage out of every other country. Most of your Black slaves went to Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, the Caribbean, and the rest went to like Brazil and Central America. Only 5% of African slaves came to North America, the United States of America. Only 5% came here. Let's go to the next clip, though. Nah, I don't want to hear that. Oh, they don't want to hear that. Ho, 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 no.
Fallacy, for instance, is that Black history begins with slavery. Black history? It's a question many of us fail to ask ourselves, despite its profound implications. A prevailing fallacy, for instance, is that Black history begins with slavery, a misconception that grossly undermines the rich and diverse ancestry of Black individuals. To challenge these inaccuracies and shed light on the truth, Dr. Claude Anderson penned Dirty Little Secrets About Black History, Its Heroes, and Other Troublemakers. Published in 1997, this national bestseller presented an alternative perspective, revealing the hidden history of Black folks within the broader historical narrative. Dr. Anderson's research delved into the often overlooked contributions and presence of Black individuals throughout history, particularly in the Americas. His work is not merely a book, it's a revolutionary exploration that challenges the status quo.
Black people are the original people on planet Earth. So we was everywhere. We didn't just come from Africa. We were everywhere, spread it all across the country. The Aboriginals of Australia are Black melanated people, are Aboriginals. Now, keep in mind, the word Black is part of a social construct, because prior to the Europeans labeling us Black, we were just Aboriginal people. But see, when the Europeans came to the Americas, they reclassified a lot of natives as Negro because they wanted to muddy the waters. They didn't want Blacks to have ownership of the land. So they made it seem like everybody came from Africa, when that's just the furthest thing from the truth. A lot of melanated, dark-skinned people who you would perceive to be African were already on this land prior to the Europeans showing up. But when the Europeans took over the Americas, they reclassified everybody at a certain skin tone as Negro. They reclassified them, but they did it for their own benefit. They created that social construct. The Europeans did that to muddy the waters. So have you noticed white people ain't never called themselves European Americans? They just called themselves white Americans, but they wanted to convince you, oh, you're African, you're African. Yes, you had Africans here, but you had Blacks that were already here as well. So if we call you an African, that means that you're a foreigner to this land and you have no claim to the land. That's why they reclassified a lot of these native groups as Africans, because they didn't want them to have ownership to the land. But see, that was manipulation from the Europeans. This is why Europeans never called themselves European Americans, white Americans, but they want to throw the label on us as African Americans when Black people been in this country longer than the Europeans. But they never called themselves European Americans, but they want to convince us to say that we're African Americans. When we all know foundational Black Americans, we can't trace none of our ancestors. If you go back 5 generations in your family as a foundational Black American, you're not going to find one African. Some of us probably can, but some of us can't. But the majority of us FBAs have no connections to Africa. We can go back centuries and our families was right here in the Americas. Now, of course, we have African DNA. I'm not denying, because life in general starts in Africa, right? Let's not get it twisted. Life in general starts in Africa. So I'm pretty sure, FBA, we do have African DNA. But what I'm saying is, when you study our family tree, we can go back 5 or 6 generations and all of our families were right here in the Americas as FBA people. That's just the reality. I'm giving you the irrefutable facts. My parents didn't come from Africa. My grandparents didn't come from Africa. My great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents didn't come from Africa. They got a long history of being here in the Americas.
Demanding recognition for the significant role of Black people in shaping our world. Dr. Anderson's book is a revolutionary work that uncovers the often overlooked contributions and presence of Black individuals in history, particularly in the Americas. Did you know that before the arrival of the so-called Native Americans, the Americas were populated by a Black population known as the Clovis Folsom? Quite a revelation, isn't it? According to Dr. Claude Anderson, in his groundbreaking book, this Black population roamed the southwestern United States a staggering 10 to 15,000 years ago. Unearthed archaeological findings lend credence to this theory. Tools, artifacts, and remnants of ancient settlements paint a vivid picture of a civilization that thrived long before the arrival of the groups we've traditionally labeled as Native Americans. The implications of this are profound and potentially game-changing. If we accept these findings as historically accurate, it challenges our whole understanding of who the first Americans truly were. We're not talking about a minor adjustment here, but a seismic shift in our perception of American history. The Clovis Folsom people of African origin were here thousands of years before the ancestors of modern-day American Indians crossed the Bering Straits onto the North American continent. This timeline, according to Dr. Anderson, places the Clovis Folsom as the oldest traceable population group on the North American continent. And what does this mean for the term Native American? Well, it calls into question its very validity. If the ancestors of today's American Indians arrived 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, then they were not the original inhabitants of these lands. They were newcomers, immigrants, just like the European settlers who would come thousands of years later. It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? That the true first Americans were not the ones we've been taught about in our history books, but a group of African blacks who established communities, lived and thrived in what is now the South.
Well, black aboriginals. We're going to call them black aboriginals because black people were the first human beings on planet Earth. It's a historical fact. You know what I mean? When you think about black people, we can create people of all complexions and colors. This is why black people can have albinos, but a non-melanated black person can't have a baby that looks like an African unless they have African DNA. But the black gene, we can produce people of all shades and all colors, from the darkest of the darkest person to a light-skinned person to an albino. Black people are capable of producing people of all complexions of colors. We're the only people with that type of DNA.
Southwestern United States. If Dr. Anderson's findings hold true, it could mean that the history of the Americas as we know it might need a significant rewrite. But then again, history is always evolving, always revealing new truths, and who knows what other secrets are waiting to be uncovered. But what impact did the Folsom people have on the Americas and its later inhabitants? Let's delve into that. The Folsom people, of African descent, left an indelible mark on the Americas. Their presence, dating back between 10 to 15,000 years, predates the arrival of the Asians across the Bering Strait by several millennia. This timeline opens up the possibility of interbreeding between these early Africans and the later arriving Asians. Could it be this mingling of lineages that contributed to the physical characteristics of the early American Indians, who bore neither distinct Asian features nor yellow skin coloring? Furthermore, the legacy of the Folsom people is echoed in the numerous monuments depicting gods with Negroid features found throughout North, Central, and South America. These artifacts, coupled with historical accounts of black-skinned people in South America, suggest a significant African presence in the Americas long before Columbus set foot on these shores. The story of the Folsom people, as told by Dr. Anderson, challenges us to rethink the narrative of American history and the role of black individuals within it. In the short span of this video, we've delved into some of the dirty little secrets about black history that Dr. Anderson reveals in his book. We've explored the common misconceptions.
Now, Mexicans, oh no, this is not true. See, Mexicans want to go against everything that black people speak about, especially when we talk about history, but they want to embrace our culture for financial gain when it's beneficial. But when it comes to our historical facts, they're the first ones to go against our historical facts. So that shows you that the modern day Mexican, they're nothing but Spanish conquistadors. Oh, we want to latch on to hip hop because we can make money of that. They want to latch on to black culture when it's beneficial, but when it's time to tell the truth about history, they always want to go against everything that we preach about. So what does that tell you about these people? I think it speaks volumes.
Unearthing the truth about the first Americans, a truth that is often buried in the sands of time. If this glimpse into a world lost to time has captured your imagination, smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe.
And just check it out for yourself, man. You ain't got to take my word for it. Everything that I'm saying, you can do your own research yourself.
Take a quick second to showcases the indomitable spirit of a people.
And this is the Black Indigenous channel. And they're not just talking, man. You have anthropologists and scientists who have done their research and studies to prove all of this stuff. This ain't somebody that's just making a video because they felt like saying something. No, this is backed up by research and studies, scientifically proven by scientists and anthropologists. This is just not somebody this is not somebody who's just uploading videos for the sake of having a conversation. We have the evidence. We have the scientists, we have the anthropologists to prove that you had black aboriginals, indigenous people to this land. They were already here prior to any Europeans showing up. Keep in mind, homie, you had different native tribes all across North America, all across the Americas in general. And not all of these native tribes look the same. Some of them were light red skin, some of them were brown, some of them were even black. But of course, they're not going to believe that because it goes against their indoctrination.
Who refuse to be subjugated. Their journey is one of courage, resilience, and an unyielding.
Now let's get back to the Black Seminoles, man, and how they defeated the Spanish. How they defeated the English in certain wars. See, when I said last time I made the video, I meant to say the Spanish. I meant to say the English. See, I keep getting twisted. The Black Seminoles went to war against the British. The Spanish, when the Spanish ruled Florida, they told, hey, as a runaway slave, you can come to Florida. And as long as you help us in our battle against the British, you guys can stay here and have your freedom. That's how they created the Black Seminole tribe, because the Black Seminoles, the runaway FBA slaves who went to Florida, created whole communities with native Seminoles, and they renamed themselves the Black Seminoles because they got married, they intermingled, and they had babies with each other.
Quest for freedom. It begins in the 17th century, a time when the world was vastly different from what we know today. The southern colonies were expanding, and with them, the brutal institution of slavery. At that time, enslaved Africans escaped from plantations in the southern colonies. These brave souls risked everything, fleeing under the cover of night, navigating treacherous terrain, and evading relentless pursuers. They saw.
Shout out to the Black Indigenous channel, man. This is backed up by studies and real research. The Spanish conquistadors, they're windmilling in the air right now. Oh, no, it's not true. It's not true. It's not true. See, Mexicans believe in what the Spanish conquistadors taught them. This is why they go against everything we say about history. Mexicans go against everything that we say about history. Why? Because they have the mindset of a conquistador. So there'll never be no black and brown unity, because Mexicans go against everything that proves our true history and roots in this country, or just in the Americas in general. Every time a black person talks about history that goes against their philosophies, their teachings, and their indoctrination, the first thing they want to say, oh, no, that's not true. You ain't got to take my word for it. Mexicans will always go against black history. And if you don't believe me, look at the Spanish conquistadors in my comment section who call themselves Mexicans, but they're just Spanish conquistadors because they have the same mindset. A Mexican is the first person to go against black history, way before a white person. You got white people, you got white scientists who said a lot of this is true. But the main people who go against black history are modern day Mexicans. I'm just giving you the facts.
Refuge in Spanish Florida, a land that promised a glimmer of hope. Unlike the English colonies, Spanish Florida offered a sanctuary, a place where the chains of slavery could be broken. Florida was a haven for those fleeing slavery. The Spanish authorities, eager to undermine the English, offered freedom to those who could make it to their territory. It was during this journey that many escaped Africans found their way to the Seminole people. The Seminoles, themselves a diverse group, were composed of various Native American tribes who had come together in Florida.
Right. See, the Seminoles in Florida, before the FBAs fled Georgia and South Carolina and fled to Florida, the Seminoles were made up of different indigenous tribes that was in Florida. These were different indigenous tribes in Florida that called themselves the Seminoles. Now, when the runaway slaves came to Florida and they mixed and mingled, had babies and intermarried, then they renamed themselves the Black Seminoles because of the intermixing, because of they had children and they had relationships.
Among them were,
and I can see the Spanish conquistadors run, oh, no, that's not true, man. Just be quiet, sit down, take notes, and become a student of this game. Sonny's going to make a video. Oh, no, it's not. Sonny is a drunk, old school Mexican who knows nothing about history. You can't take anything. Sonny, why don't you talk about prison and barrios? Sonny don't know anything outside of prison lifestyle and barrios. He knows nothing about history, and he's old enough to be my grandfather.
Remnants of indigenous black tribes like the Yamasee, who had once fought their own great war with European colonists. Famed traveler William Bartram stated about the Yamasee that their women were known for their beauty and referred to as the daughters of the sun due to their dark skin. The various Native American tribes who had come together offered freedom to those who could make it to their territory. It was during this journey that many escaped Africans found their way to the Seminole people. The Seminoles, themselves a diverse group, were composed of various Native American tribes who had come together in Florida. Among them were remnants of indigenous black tribes like the Yamasee, who had once fought their own great war with European colonists. Famed traveler William Bartram stated about the Yamasee that their women were known for their beauty and referred to as the daughters of the sun due to their dark skin complexion. All in all, it was these indigenous tribes who welcomed the Africans with open arms, recognizing the shared struggle against oppression and the potential for mutual benefit. The Seminoles saw the Africans as valuable allies. Together they could resist the encroaching threats from colonial powers and slave catchers. They offered them protection and a place in their communities. This was not just an act of charity, but a strategic alliance that would strengthen both groups. This alliance between the Seminoles and the Africans grew stronger over time. They shared resources, knowledge, and a common goal of freedom. They forged deep bonds of kinship and shared experiences. These bonds were not just political, but deeply personal, rooted in mutual respect and shared hardship. They intermarried and created a new culture. This blending of traditions and bloodlines gave rise to a unique community. This culture blended African and Seminole traditions. It was a rich tapestry of customs, languages, and beliefs, creating a vibrant and resilient society. This unique group became known as the Black Seminoles. They were a testament to the power of unity and the human spirit's capacity to adapt and thrive. They adapted to life in the Florida swamps and forests. These environments, though harsh, provided a natural fortress against their enemies. They became skilled hunters, fishermen, and warriors. Their knowledge of the land and survival skills were unparalleled, making them formidable opponents. The Black Seminoles were fiercely independent. They valued their autonomy and were determined to maintain it at all costs. They were determined to protect their newfound freedom.
Sonny said that the Black Seminoles were not FBA when literally the runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina went to Florida to create the Black Seminoles with the Seminole natives that were there. They blended their cultures and came with the name the Black Seminoles. You got Black Seminoles in Mexico today who are direct descendants of FBA, who fled to Mexico when Mexico told Black Seminoles they can come down there and they can get freedom as long as they help to protect the Mexico borders against the British Army. You know, pretty much. The British that was in the Americas. The Black Seminoles in Mexico celebrate Juneteenth because they understand their FBA roots. The runaway slaves were foundational Black Americans. But of course, you can't expect for Sonny to understand that.
This determination would lead them to fight valiantly in the Seminole Wars, resisting removal and oppression with every ounce of their strength. But before we get into the rest of this video, we want to take a quick second to tell you about our special limited time offer.
See, there was a such thing called the Negro War. It was the Negro War, and they were talking about the Black Seminoles because the Black Seminoles put up a lot of resistance against the British Army in America because you had the Spanish and the British in America. The Spanish ruled Florida. The British wanted more territory. They wanted to take over Florida, but eventually the Spanish caved in, and in 1821, I believe it was 1821, I could be wrong, but it was somewhere around that time where Spain sold Florida to the British, and then Florida became a part of the United States later, but originally Florida was not a part of the United States. It was ran by the Spanish. Florida became a part of the United States later once Spain sold Florida to the Brits. The British who conquered the United States. Then eventually you had the British people here who said, okay, we want to separate from Britain and we just want to be Americans. So that's why you have July 4th, America's independence, because the British people in America, the white British people, wanted to be independent of the British over there in Europe. So they fought to separate themselves. That's why you have July 4th, the Independence Day here in America. That was white people separating themselves from the whites and British. They didn't want to be ruled by Britain. They didn't want to be ruled by Britain. That's why we celebrate July 4th, Independence Day.
We are giving away free copies of our newest critically acclaimed book, 13 Black Scholars Who Admitted There Were Black People in the Americas Before Columbus. This exclusive offer is our way of saying thank you for your incredible support and sticking with us on our knowledge-filled journey into true ancient American history. Dive deep into history with us and uncover truths that challenge what we've been taught. But hurry, this offer won't last forever. Click the link in the description and grab your free copy. Now, let's get back to the video. The Black Seminoles were not simply absorbed into Seminole society. They retained many aspects of their Black culture and heritage. This included their languages, music, and religious beliefs. This fusion of cultures created a vibrant and distinct Black Seminole identity. Within Seminole communities, Black Seminoles held positions of leadership and influence. They served as advisors, interpreters, and warriors. Their knowledge of European languages and customs proved invaluable to the Seminoles. This integration was not without its complexities. The Seminoles, like many Native American societies, had their own social structures and hierarchies. However,
I need everybody that's watching to bless that like button. When this video get a gang of views, the Spanish conquistadors, they're going to be windmilling and punching the air. Sonny's going to try his best to make a response video when history is not on his side. History is on our side. So if you're a foundational Black American and you appreciate the fact that I'm giving you the facts about history, make sure that you bless the like button, because if you don't bless that like button, you're committing a crime.
the relationship between the Black Seminoles and the Seminole Nation was one of mutual respect and interdependence. They relied on each other for survival and defense against a conflict. Many Native American societies had their own social structures and hierarchies. However, the relationship between the Black Seminoles and the Seminole Nation was one of mutual respect and interdependence. They relied on each other for survival and defense against a common enemy, the United States. The Black Seminoles played a crucial role in shaping Seminole culture. They introduced new agricultural techniques and crafts. They also enriched Seminole music and storytelling with their African heritage. The Black Seminoles became an integral part of the Seminole Nation. As the United States expanded southward, it set its sights on Florida. This expansion was driven by a combination of ambition and necessity. The young nation was eager to grow its territory and influence, and Florida, with its strategic position and fertile lands, was an attractive target. The U.S. government coveted Florida's fertile land and strategic location. The region promised rich agricultural opportunities and a crucial foothold for trade and military advantage. The lush landscapes and abundant resources made it a prize worth pursuing. The presence of runaway slaves in Florida further fueled the desire for conquest. These individuals sought freedom and refuge among the Seminoles, creating a haven that the U.S. government viewed as a threat to its authority and the institution of slavery. Tensions between the Seminoles, including the Black Seminoles and American settlers, escalated. The settlers, driven by expansionist desires.
See, Mexicans, they're not even aware of all these different slave revolts that happened in the United States. Nat Turner did a lot of damage. They had to bring in the military to capture Nat Turner because Nat Turner had a bunch of loyal followers who said, we're not going to be slaves no more. So Nat Turner, they went from plantation to plantation in the South, unaliving slave masters and burning down plantations. Nat Turner did so much damage to the slave masters that they had to bring in the U.S. Army to hunt down Nat Turner and his followers. Just like the Black Seminoles in Florida, they put up a major resistance against, the Europeans, the British, because they refused to go back in captivity. They fought for their freedom. They said, there's no way we're going back in captivity. We're going to fight for our freedom. So when Spain sold Florida, it put the Black Seminoles in a vulnerable position because they no longer had the protection of the Spanish army. So they were left to fend for themselves, and they did a good job at fending for themselves against the British who invaded Florida. I'm giving you historical facts.
And racial prejudices clashed with the Seminoles, who were determined to protect their land and people. Slaves from Georgia and South Carolina continued to seek refuge among the Seminoles. This influx of runaways not only strained resources but also heightened the stakes of the conflict, as the U.S. government saw the Seminoles' defiance as a direct challenge to its laws and sovereignty. The U.S. government...
Yeah, Indians was enslaved first. A lot of Indians was enslaved. This is why so many Native Indians fled to Florida, because Florida was ruled by the Spanish. So you had a lot of native tribes. Listen, before the FBA runaway slaves fled to Florida, you had runaway indigenous tribes that already fled to Florida because they said, Spain said, you natives can come down here to Florida and you ain't got to worry about being enslaved. So eventually, the black runaway slaves from Georgia, South Carolina, and that particular region, they fled to Florida and they joined the natives that was in Florida, and they created this beautiful tribe called the Black Seminoles. They blended their cultures. They had babies with each other. They created whole communities and renamed themselves the Black Seminoles. I've said it several times during this podcast because you got a lot of slow people who are listening. That's why I continue to repeat it for the slow people who don't get it. But Florida was a rest haven not only for the FBA runaway slaves, it was a rest haven for the natives who didn't want to live in British colonies no more because Florida was ruled by the Spanish. So if you wanted to runaway slaves who were Native American or foundational Black Americans, they all escaped to Florida. And they created beautiful tribes and civilizations together because they wanted to escape British colonies. That's why they fled to Florida, because the Spanish ruled Florida at that particular time. It's crazy that I even got to have this conversation. You would think that people with common sense would know this, but when you've been brainwashed by Spanish conquistadors, you'll never be honest about history.
Demanded the return of these runaways. The Seminoles refused.
Make sure that you guys continue to bless that like button and support the Cash App and the Super Chat, because the more you support my show, the more pissed off you're going to have these Spanish conquistadors. When they see you guys hitting the like button and blessing the Super Chat and the views are going up, you're only pissing them off. But guess what? We're giving them the historical facts, the irrefutable facts. So anytime you bless the like button and show some love and support to the channel, that pisses them off even more. Their blood is boiling right now. You can see them in the comment section windmilling. No, that's not true. No.
Flux of runaways not only strained resources, but also heightened the stakes of the conflict, as the U.S. government saw the Seminoles' defiance as a direct challenge to its laws and sovereignty. The U.S. government demanded the return of these runaways. The Seminoles refused. Their refusal was not just an act of defiance, but a statement of their autonomy and commitment to protecting those who sought their help. This determination was rooted in a deep sense of justice and solidarity, as the Seminoles and their Black allies stood united against external threats.
As a result, in 1817, the United States Army invaded Spanish Florida. This bold move was intended to assert control and suppress the Seminole resistance, marking a significant escalation in the conflict. This incursion, known as the First Seminole War, marked the beginning of decades of conflict. The war...
Yeah, I mean, see, and I said this before, they called everybody African because they wanted to reclassify people. The Black Aboriginals, you had Black Aboriginals that were here, but what they did was they reclassified all dark-skinned people. They reclassified them and called them Negro to make it seem like they were African so that they wouldn't have ownership to the land. But see, that's what the Europeans did. You got a lot of Blacks in the Americas that were reclassified as Negroes when they didn't come on slave ships. You had Black people who did come on slave ships, but you had some Black people who didn't come on slave ships. But the Europeans did that to muddy up the waters. If I call everybody a Negro, if I reclassify these dark-skinned melanated people as Negro, then they'll look like foreigners. They'll look like people who just came on slave ships, and then they will have no ownership to the what? To the land. So that was a strategic plan by the European. That was a strategic plan by the European. Let's reclassify all these melanated people as Negro to make it seem like they all came on slave ships, when only 5% of African slaves came to the Americas, well, North America. The overwhelming majority of your African slaves went to Latin America, not the United States. The United States only took in 5% of all African slaves. That was the lowest percentage of... Anyway, you get it.
Was characterized by brutal battles, strategic maneuvers, and a relentless struggle for dominance.
The Seminoles, including their Black allies, fought fiercely to defend their land and their way of life. Their resistance was a testament to their resilience and determination to preserve.
This is Black Aboriginal, man. Black Aboriginal. And you got scholars, man. He's not getting this information from thin air. These are Black scholars, homie. Scientists and anthropologists who have studied some of the first people of the Americas, and these were melanated people. These were not, anyway, you get it. Just study the history. You ain't got to take my word for it.
Their culture.
Shout out to Danny Valencia for blessing the Cash App. Shout out to Back in Action for blessing the Cash App. Shout out to Cheesehead Ali and Desmond Hill for blessing the Cash App, might I say.
And autonomy. The First Seminole War ended in 1819 with the Treaty of...
Yeah, I knew it was only 5 to 3%, but a small percentage of African slaves were brought to this place called the United States. Only 3 to 5%, and maybe it was 3. The majority of your African slaves were taken to Latin America.
Poultry Creek. This treaty was a temporary resolution forcing the Seminoles to make significant concessions. This treaty forced the Seminoles to cede much of their land in exchange for a reservation in Central Florida. The loss of their ancestral lands was a heavy blow, but the Seminoles continued to resist and adapt. However, the treaty was poorly enforced, and encroachment by white settlers continued. This ongoing encroachment led to further conflicts and set the stage for future wars as the Seminoles' struggle for survival and sovereignty persisted. By the 1830s, tensions between the Seminoles and the U.S. government reached a boiling point. The Seminoles, a proud and resilient people, had long resisted the encroachment of settlers on their lands. Their resistance was not just a matter of pride, but of survival, as their way of life was deeply intertwined with the land they inhabited. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 called for the relocation of all Native American tribes east of the Mississippi River to lands west of the Mississippi. This act, signed into law by President Andrew Jackson, was seen as a solution to the Indian problem by many in the government. However, for the Native American tribes, it was a devastating blow, uprooting them from their ancestral homelands and forcing them into unfamiliar territories.
See, that's what happened, you know, when Spain when Spain sold Florida to the United States. They said, you guys got to move to Oklahoma because they wanted to take over Florida. But the Black Seminoles was willing to go to war for it. They didn't just up and move. They actually went to war for it and fought against the British Army because they understood the land, and there was guerrilla warfare took place in those swamps down in Florida because there's a lot of swamps in Florida, and the Black Seminoles understood the land and how to navigate that land. So they ambushed a lot of the British once they came to Florida trying to dominate and take over. So the Black Seminoles put up a major resistance against the British Army. That's a fact. Some of them did move to Oklahoma, but some of them didn't. Some of them fled to Mexico. Some of them stayed in Florida. Some of them dispersed to different areas across the United States. So shout out to the Black Seminoles. Sonny said that the Black Seminoles are not FBA. Man, foundational Black Americans who escaped those plantations in Georgia and South Carolina fled to Florida. These are foundational Black Americans. The Black Seminoles have direct blood ties to FBAs who were runaway slaves and Black Aboriginals.
The Seminoles, including the Black Seminoles, refused to leave their ancestral homelands. In 1835, Major General Edmund Pendleton Gaines, commander of U.S. forces in Florida, ordered Major Francis Dade to lead a column of soldiers from Fort Brooke, present-day Tampa, to Fort King, near present-day Ocala. This mission was seen as crucial to maintaining control over the region and suppressing the growing resistance of the Seminoles. Dade's mission was to reinforce Fort King and subdue the increasingly resistant Seminoles. The U.S. government believed that a show of military strength would be enough to intimidate the Seminoles into submission. However, they underestimated the resolve and strategic acumen of their adversaries. Dade's column, consisting of 110 men, set out on December 23, 1835. The soldiers, clad in their uniforms and carrying their weapons, marched through the dense Florida scrub. The terrain was challenging, with thick vegetation and swamps making progress slow and arduous. They marched through the dense Florida scrub, unaware of the danger.
There's a lot of crazy wildlife in Florida, man. When you go to those Everglades in Florida, you got alligators, you got you got snakes, you got all type of crazy wildlife in Florida. But the Black Seminoles understood how to navigate that land. and that gave them an advantage. But at the same time, the American, the British had a strong army, so they would send soldiers and more soldiers and more soldiers. They had an endless supply of soldiers, and they kept sending British invaders to Florida to defeat the Black Seminoles
that lay ahead. The soldiers were confident in their mission, believing that their superior numbers and firepower would ensure their success. Little did they know, the Seminoles were watching their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike.
For the Black Seminoles are direct descendants of FBA. That's who went to Florida. The runaway slaves on these slave plantations fled to Florida for freedom. Because the Spanish said, if you guys come to Florida, we'll protect you. As long as you help us, we'll help you. So you help us and we'll help you. So when you got this drunk old man saying that the Black Seminoles were not FBA, he don't know what he's talking about. The runaway slaves from these plantations are the ones who fled to Florida to create the Black Seminoles. The natives that was in Florida, they were runaways. The natives who went to Florida, they wanted to escape British colonies. That's why they escaped to Florida. They were runaways. Look up the word Seminole and understand what the word Seminole means. So you had runaway natives and you had runaway black slaves from the plantations who all fled to Florida together and created this tribe called the Black Seminoles. You got Black Seminoles that exist in Mexico who celebrate Juneteenth in Mexico. Bet you didn't know that, Sonny.
The Seminoles, under the leadership of Chiefs Osceola, Jumper, and McCanopy, had been carefully monitoring Dade's movements. These leaders were not only skilled warriors, but also astute strategists, understanding the importance of choosing the right moment and location for their attack. The Seminoles' strategy mastered.
Not all the Seminoles moved, man. Some of those Seminoles did move, but some of them stayed in Florida. Not all of them fled to Mexico. Not all of them fled to Oklahoma. Some of them stayed there and fought. And you still have Black Seminoles, people of the Black Seminoles who still exist in Florida, the southeast region of the United States. You even got Black Seminoles that exist in Texas because they didn't just stay in one area. They moved to Texas. They fled to Mexico. Some of them went to Oklahoma. So they're all over the place.
Minded by Osceola was to ambush Dade's column. Osceola, a charismatic and fearless leader, had rallied his people to the cause, inspiring them with his vision of resistance and freedom. His plan was to use the element of surprise to their advantage, striking the soldiers when they least expected it. They chose a location along the route where the terrain favored their fighting style. The dense vegetation and uneven ground would make it difficult for the soldiers to maneuver and respond effectively. The Seminoles,
like you have the Choctaws. You have the Choctaw. That was another tribe. These were black Aboriginals. Just like you have, listen, what these Mexicans don't understand that there were too many different tribes of people. There were too many different tribes in the Americas, and even in Mexico, there were different indigenous Aboriginal tribes of Mexico. They're not all the same. They had the different languages, different cultures. They're not all the same. If you go to Africa today, Africa is not just one tribe of people. Africa is a continent of people with different languages, different cultures, different beliefs, different presidents, different everything. All Africans are not the same. Some of them look different. They talk different. The same thing with the Americas. You had different native tribes of the Americas. Some of them were black. Some of them were red skinned. They're not all the same.
those familiar with the land could use it to their advantage, launching swift and devastating attacks. Charismatic and fearless leader had rallied his people to the cause, inspiring them with his vision of resistance and freedom. His plan was to use the element of surprise to their advantage, striking the soldiers when they least expected it. They chose a location along the route where the terrain favored their fighting style. The dense vegetation and uneven ground would make it difficult for the soldiers to maneuver and respond effectively. The Seminoles, familiar with the land, could use it to their advantage, launching swift and devastating attacks. This spot, near present-day Bushnell, Florida, would become the site of one of the most significant battles in the Second Seminole War. The events that unfolded here would not only shape the course of the war, but also leave a lasting legacy on the history of the region. The bravery and determination of the Seminoles in this battle would be remembered for generations to come, a testament to their unyielding spirit and fight for their homeland. On December 28, 1835, as Dade's column marched through a dense hammock of trees and palmetto scrub, the Seminoles launched their attack. The Seminoles, concealed in the thick undergrowth, opened fire with devastating accuracy. The element of surprise was complete. Dade's soldiers, caught off guard, were mowed down by a hail of bullets. Dade himself was one of the first to fall, shot dead early in the engagement. The Seminoles, skilled warriors who knew the terrain intimately, used guerrilla tactics to their advantage. The soldiers, trained for conventional warfare on open battlefields, were ill-prepared for this type of fighting. They struggled to return fire, their muskets ineffective against the Seminoles' concealed positions. The battle raged for hours, a desperate struggle for survival against overwhelming odds. By the time the fighting subsided, Dade's entire column lay dead, except for 3 survivors who managed to escape the carnage. The Seminoles, having achieved a decisive victory, melted back into the swamps, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. Horrors that would shake white Americans to their core for the next several months to come. After General Dade got put in the dirt, many large plantations were burnt and settlers killed. By the end of 1836, all but one house in what is now Miami was left standing. The terror the Black Seminoles rained down on Florida eventually forced the United States government to reach an agreement that would relocate the Black Seminoles out of Florida without the possibility of enslavement, making them one of the first groups in American history to successfully free themselves through violent resistance. Dade's name would go on to be remembered through what is now Dade County, the official county that seats the city of Miami. Yet it is a must we never forget how his name got there and the black warriors who made it possible. Trust us when we say, this journey through America's hidden black past is just beginning. If this glimpse into a world lost to time has captured your...
So, yeah, man, this is the content. I appreciate you all for blessing the like button. I'm gonna show you how ignorant Sonny is. I'm gonna show you guys how ignorant Sonny is. I got the video. You're gonna be like, whoa, this old man is that ignorant. Watch this. I'm gonna show you the video that he made yesterday. And Sonny, guess what? I'm doing you a favor by even talking about you, but I'm talking about you to show your ignorance. That's why I'm talking about you. Now watch this ignorant old man right here. He don't know anything about history, and the dude is 70 years old. Imagine a 70-year-old man being this ignorant about history. Look.
Cracking the guys, buenos dias.
He said the Black Seminoles are not FBA. When the Black Seminoles came to the runaway slaves came together with the natives in Florida, and they created the Black Seminoles together. You got Black Seminoles in Mexico who celebrate Juneteenth. But this old school fool said, no, the Black Seminoles are not FBA.
Kind of sick right now, so I think I got the flu. But I want to make this video. It got brought.
Shout out to T-Fam for blessing the super chat. I appreciate you, T-Fam.
To my attention the other day. Somebody was talking about it. Talking about the Seminoles, which are a tribe in Florida that were indigenous, right? And through history and through records and researching, and I found out, which I already knew was true.
He's a Mexican, man. He don't know nothing about Florida history. He don't know anything about history. He don't know nothing about Florida. Sonny is too ignorant to understand that the black runaway slaves from Georgia and South Carolina fled to Florida and created the Black Seminoles with the natives that was in Florida because they were both being oppressed by the British. This is why the natives escaped British colonies along with the runaway slaves who were FBA who fled Georgia plantations and South Carolina plantations. They all fled to Florida because the Spanish ruled Florida. They all came together because they had a common enemy, which were the British people in British colonies. So the black the FBAs who fled went to Florida and they mixed and mingled with the Seminoles that was there, and they created the Black Seminoles. They blended their cultures and came together. They got married and had children. This is why they call themselves the Black Seminoles. But can you expect for this old man to understand that? No, Sonny don't know nothing, man. Imagine being 70 years old and being this ignorant.
But I wanted to double check on it. The Seminoles welcomed in the blacks, slaves. They embraced them and brought them into their tribe to protect them. Now, the other day, the video was talking about the Seminoles, black Seminoles it was a black tribe, which is not true. It was an indigenous tribe that
they were not called the Black Seminoles until FBA showed up and they blended together to create the Black Seminoles. You talk about being old and ignorant.
Now, the other day, the video was talking about the Seminoles, black Seminoles it was a black tribe, which is not true. It was an indigenous tribe that took in black slaves to protect them. And there became the Black Seminoles, which became really close with the Seminoles of the indigenous, right? But they clearly state that it was slaves that were brought into the Black Seminoles. Now,
Sonny, why don't you keep telling prison stories? Why don't you keep talking about the Vadio and prison stories? Because you know nothing about history, old man. Keep talking about Vadios and prison stories, Sonny.
Fast forward into today, there is a dispute with the Seminoles indigenous and the blacks that grew up with the Seminoles. Because they had grandfathers and grandmothers that were part of the Seminole tribe because they were slaves at one point, and Florida Seminole indigenous Indians took them in to protect them. Now they're wanting reparations for being indigenous, but they weren't indigenous. They were slaves.
They want reparations for being slaves on his land. The reparations that FBA is fighting for is reparations for being enslaved on his land. It has nothing to do with the Aboriginal. Now, you got black Aboriginals who are getting reparations in some of these areas, right? But foundational black Americans are fighting for reparations because of all the free labor that we gave to this country. That's what the reparations conversation is about. Sonny is too ignorant to understand what FBA is even fighting for. The man is uneducated. He's ignorant to history. He's ignorant when it comes to history. Sonny, continue to talk about Vadios and Mexican gangs. You don't know nothing about history. I want you to hear what this fool said that the reparations fight is all about. Oh, FBA is fighting for reparations. They want to claim that they're indigenous, and that's what the reparations conversation is about. The reparation conversation is about us fighting to get paid for all the free labor that we gave to this country, plus all the countless inventions that Europeans took credit for, that we built, that we created. This man is old and ignorant.
At one point, fast forward into today, there is a dispute with the Seminoles indigenous and the blacks that grew up with the Seminoles. Because they had grandfathers and grandmothers that were part of the Seminole tribe because they were slaves at one point, and Florida Seminole indigenous Indians took them in to protect them. Now they're wanting reparations for being indigenous, but they weren't indigenous. They were slaves. And now the Seminole, there was one spokesman I heard that say that they regret that their forefathers would have taken in the black slaves in order to help them if they knew that today that they were going to do what FBA is doing, trying to take over, trying to claim the fame, basically. It was just something I thought it was interesting. And you know, this guy, he threw out fake. He only throws out facts that they're not even facts. What they are is he hears something, he runs with it. He doesn't look into.
But Sonny is too ignorant. He's too ignorant to understand that the blacks helped the Seminoles in Florida, because the Europeans were trying to invade Florida. So the Spanish said, okay, you had runaway natives who went to Florida for protection as well. Sonny don't understand that. The natives in Florida ran to Florida because Florida was a Spanish colony. The natives who wanted to escape the British colonies fled to the Spanish colony in Florida, where they received protection under the Spanish. The black runaway slaves from South Carolina and Georgia fled to Florida as well because they wanted to escape British colonies. So when the black runaway slaves, which were FBA, Foundational Black Americans, when they got to Florida, they teamed up with the native runaway slaves and they created a whole tribe called the Black Seminoles. They created these tribes together. Why? Because they were both dealing with the same British oppression. The British oppressor. They both wanted to escape British colonies. That's why natives fled to Mexico. This is why this is why natives fled to Florida, which is why foundational Black Americans from Georgia and South Carolina fled to Florida. They link up together because they had a common enemy, which were the British, and they created the Black Seminole tribe together. They had babies, they intermixed. They shared knowledge of farming and agriculture, shared different languages, all type of culture. They blended together and created the Black Seminoles. The native tribes who fled to Florida was enslaved by the British as well. That's why they fled to Florida, because they received protection under the Spanish. They needed our help just like we needed their help. So we came together to create the Black Seminoles. But of course, Sonny is too ignorant to understand that. Sonny, keep talking about barrios and gangs. You don't know nothing about history, bro.
It doesn't research. I thought it was interesting. And you know, this guy, he threw out fake. He only throws out facts that they're not even facts. What they are is he hears something, he runs with it. He doesn't look into it, doesn't research it, doesn't know anything about it. But he hears there's something that's gonna fit his narrative, and he runs to it and he starts using it. And that's what happened with the Seminoles, which are, like I said, indigenous Indians, and it's an indigenous tribe, and they're fighting for the tribal funds right now, right? And now they got to fight with the blacks, slaves that try to, it's not even so much the black slaves, but the ancestors of the black slaves, which are FBA. And that's one of the main reasons that they are trying to push forward, saying that they were indigenous to this land, which we all know there isn't. There is no such facts, no kind of credibility or research that shows that the blacks were here prior to the indigenous Indians.
There is research and studies to prove that, but you're ignorant. Keep talking about barrios and street gangs, Sonny. You know nothing about history, and you're 70 years old. You're old enough to be my grandfather.
Yeah, there's a thing with the DNA. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but there's a thing with the DNA with the indigenous Indians is we have a different DNA than the blacks. And the reason is there's something in our blood that makes us different than every other race. Blacks, whites, Asian, everything. There's a different thing in our blood that makes indigenous difference, and that's how they tell who an indigenous person is. Not only that, it's that
your average Mexican today has majority Spanish European blood. Your average Mexican has majority Spanish conquistador blood with some native DNA as well, with a splash of African. A Mexican DNA is the majority Spanish conquistador with native blood, along with some African blood, and some of them have traces of Asian blood as well. So Mexicans ain't nothing but a mixture of different people. It's not a race. Mexican is not a race. It's a mixture of a different people. Then they created their own culture. But don't get it twisted for 1 second. Mexican is not a race. It's never been a race. It's a mixture of different cultures, a mixture of different DNAs and people. There's no such thing as a Mexican race.
All the DNA is based
I
out.
want you to hear how stupid this guy, man. I'm gonna be quiet because sometimes I'll be wanting to talk. I want you to see how ignorant this guy is. I'm gonna let it play, and he's gonna prove his ignorance.
And the black slaves in order to help them if they knew that today that they were going to do what FBA is doing, trying to take over, trying to claim the fame, basically. It was just something I thought it was interesting. And, you know, this guy, he threw out fake. He only throws out facts that they're not even facts. What they are is he hears something, he runs with it. He doesn't look into it, doesn't research it, doesn't know anything about it. But he hears there's something that's going to fit his narrative, and he runs to it, and he starts using it. And that's what happened with the Seminoles, which are, like I said, indigenous Indians. And it's an indigenous tribe, and they're fighting for the tribal funds right now, right? And now they're going to fight with the blacks, slaves that try to, it's not even so much the black slaves, but the ancestors of the black slaves, which are FBA. And that's one of the main reasons that they're trying to.
The blacks didn't bring diseases. You got some idiot. The Europeans brought diseases that eliminated native tribes. You got some dude called chemically concocted. He's an idiot. He said the natives were doing fine until the disease came from the blacks. Until the disease came and the blacks were a part of that. No, the Europeans are the ones who brought diseases that eliminated the natives. If you go to Puerto Rico, if you go to Cuba, the diseases that the Europeans brought over is what took out a lot of the natives. The blacks didn't bring diseases. It was the Europeans who brought these diseases. These people are ignorant. I swear these people are ignorant. The diseases came from the Europeans.
Indigenous Indians, and it's an indigenous tribe, and they're fighting for the tribal funds right now, right? And now they're going to fight with the blacks, slaves that try to, it's not even so much the black slaves, but the ancestors of the black slaves, which are FBA. And that's one of the main reasons that they are trying to push forward, saying that they were indigenous to this land, which we all know there isn't. There is no such facts, no kind of credibility or research that shows that the blacks were here prior to the indigenous Indians. Indigenous Indians, there's a thing with the DNA. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but there's a thing with the DNA with the indigenous Indians is we have a different DNA than the blacks. And the reason is there's something in our blood that makes us different than every other race. Blacks, whites, Asian, everything. There's a different thing in our blood that makes indigenous different, and that's how they tell who an indigenous person is. Not only that, it's that all the DNA is based out of Europe, actually, on the DNA coming out of Europe. So blacks were...
All the DNA is coming out of Europe. Europeans are not the original people. He said all DNA is coming out of Europe. Okay.
That makes indigenous difference, and that's how they tell who an indigenous person is. Not only that, it's that all the DNA is based out of Europe, actually, on the DNA coming out of Europe. So blacks were, if not the first race, one of the first races out there. I'm not going to say that they are their first race because that's probably impossible. It's probably unlogical if you really think about it, but I'm not gonna say that they ain't the first. They aren't the first, okay, in Europe, but they are not the first in...
Put a 1 in the chat if you feel like Sonny is slow and uneducated. And you ain't got to agree with me. If you disagree with me, put a 2. If you feel like Sonny is uneducated and slow, put a 1 in the comments. He said DNA comes from Europe, and the Black Seminoles have no blood ties to FBA. They were not FBA. Put a 1 in the chat if you feel like this fool is slow, uneducated, and ignorant.
All the DNA is based out of Europe, actually, on the DNA coming out of Europe. So blacks were, if not the first race, one of the first races out there. I'm not going to say that they are their first race because that's probably impossible. It's probably unlogical if you really think about it, but I'm not gonna say that they ain't the first. They aren't the first, okay, in Europe, but they are not the first in North America, or the Americas. Period. It's actually indigenous. They got evidence. They got facts to prove it, to back it up. I challenge that idiot that was talking about it, that racist talking about it, to prove forward facts. Now, when I talk about facts,
now he calls me a racist. Imagine him calling me racist. And this is the same guy that said the raza needs to march in heavy protest so that blacks can get reparations. So he wants to march and protest, and he wants the raza to march with him to protest against blacks getting reparations. But he calls me a racist.
I don't mean coming out reading some guy that decides that he want to be indigenous and writes a book about it. Those are not facts. We're talking about facts that can be proven with science and DNA and records. If you won't have all those three, they're not facts.
No, there's scientists and anthropologists who prove that blacks were here prior to the 1500s. Way before the 1500s. This is scientifically proven. You wouldn't understand that. You're so ignorant that you said that Black Seminoles are not FBA. How ignorant you got to be to say that.
All there is a hypothesis that you feel is truth. Doesn't be proven.
It's not a hypothesis. It's not a hypothesis. It's a scientifically proven, Sonny. The Black Seminoles are FBA. Why do you think the Black Seminoles in Mexico celebrate Juneteenth? And Juneteenth is an FBA holiday. These are people who come from chattel slavery. The Black Seminoles who fled to Mexico. You had Black Seminoles who fled to Mexico, and they assisted the Mexican government in protecting their borders in Mexico. That's why Mexico said, if you guys help us to defend the borders, we'll give you guys freedom, we'll give you guys land. So it was a fair exchange. Fair exchange, no robbery, baby.
With science and DNA and
I bet money Sonny didn't even realize that Mexicans, the Black Seminoles in Mexico, celebrate Juneteenth. He didn't know that. Now he'll pretend like he knew that because he's been watching my videos. So he'll pretend like he knew that Black Seminoles in Mexico celebrated Juneteenth. Why do Black Seminoles in Mexico celebrate Juneteenth? Because they have blood ties to FBA. These are foundational Black Americans who fled to Mexico. Now, of course, when they went to Mexico, they mixed with some of the people that was in Mexico and had babies with them, but don't get it twisted. The Black Seminoles in Mexico still pay homage to their FBA roots, which is why they celebrate Juneteenth in Mexico. I showed you the video.
Records. That racist talking about it to prove forward facts. Now, when I talk about facts, I don't mean coming out reading some guy that decides that he want to be indigenous and writes a book about it. Those are not facts. We're talking about facts that can be proven with science and DNA and records. If you won't have all those three, they're not facts. All there is a hypothesis that you feel is truth. Doesn't make it true. So I just want to speak on that because I am part indigenous and I feel offended when somebody tries to steal our ancestry And that's what they're doing. It's like, unfortunately, a lot of blacks that were brought to the United States through slavery have lost their ancestry, have lost their history, because they were brought from another continent, which was Europe and Africa, right? The Spaniards and black conquistadors enslaved the blacks and brought them to the United States and sold them. Not to the United States, but to the Americans, and sold them, right? So in the process, they lost all their history and ancestry. And yes, you can get some of it back through DNA testing, which that idiot should be doing some DNA testing to find out he's not indigenous. You can get
the Africans that was brought to the United States was brought by the British. Now, the Africans that were brought to Mexico were brought by the Spanish. He's ignorant. He doesn't know his history. This dude is ignorant, and he's 70 years old, man. The Africans, and like I said, there were only 3 to 5% of African slaves were brought to the United States. That's a small percentage. The majority of African slaves were brought to Latin America, Sonny. So the blacks who came to the United States were brought over here by the British, the English, not Spanish. This is why we speak English in America, because the English colonized America. So we speak English here, Sonny. You guys speak Spanish in Mexico because Spain dominated Mexico, conquered Mexico. They conquered the Aztecs. They conquered many more indigenous tribes in Mexico. The Spanish conquistadors dominated Mexico. They enslaved the Aztecs. They conquered the land and rewrote the history. So a lot of your history is missing. Do you know that the Spanish conquistadors erased a lot of the history in Mexico? But of course, Sonny will never admit that. He'll pretend like he knows everything about history. The Spanish conquistadors erased a lot of history in Mexico to confuse you guys, so that you won't understand the true history. The same way that the British, Europeans in the United States, they did their best to erase a lot of this history. This is why they reclassified a lot of these natives as Negroes, because they had dark skin. And when you call somebody a Negro, that was a code word for African. This dude is ignorant. The Spanish conquistadors erased a lot of history in Mexico. Seriously.
Some kind of, I guess, maybe closure from that. But it's not fair to the ones like the indigenous or Mexicanos that were born over here in the Americas, to steal their culture, their ancestry, the Olmecas, the Aztecas, and all these different tribes that were here in the Americas way prior to any slavery, for somebody to try to take that credit and that history and that
Sonny, you're a Spanish conquistador, bro. You're a Spanish conquistador. If anybody stole your history, it was the Spanish conquistadors, not black folks, not the black aboriginals, not the black Africans. See, it's mighty funny that he won't hold the Spaniards accountable for stealing his history. He's trying to blame black people for stealing his history. The Spanish conquistadors stole a lot of history in Mexico. The Spanish conquistadors erased a lot of history in Mexico. That's who erased your history. That's who colonized you. That's who dominated and conquered your people, the Spanish conquistadors. The Spanish conquistadors erased a lot of history in Mexico, just like the British in the United States erased a lot of the history in the United States. That's what Europeans do. They lie about history. They colonize the land and they erase the history, then they rewrite the history. That's what Spanish conquistadors are known for doing. That is what British settlers were doing. That is what Europeans are known for doing. They erase the history, then they rewrite the history and tell their story. What makes Sonny think that the Spanish conquistadors didn't erase a lot of history in Mexico? They're Europeans, just like the British are Europeans. That is European nature for them to erase the history and then tell their version of history. That is what Europeans are known for doing. They did it in the United States of America. They erased a lot of history in Mexico as well.
That rich culture that we have, that we're so proud of, And it's a shame that a different race like FBA would try to take that. And I don't even call FBA a race because they're not credit in that history and that rich culture that we have, that we're so proud of. And it's a shame that a different race like FBA would try to take that. And I don't even call FBA a race because they're not. It's just a group of individuals that are trying to push a fake narrative out there, and that's what they're doing. That's all they're doing. They're trying to cause ruckus and mayhem and try to steal whatever they want. You know, we have a rich culture. I'm proud of that culture. I love my gente. You know what I mean? Indigenous, Mexicano, I love you guys. You know what I mean? I wouldn't want to be anything else. But people like FBA, the ones that I'm talking about, that racist, he wants to be something else. He doesn't want to be black. And
we are black. That's why we call ourselves foundational Black Americans, you fool. How you gonna fix your mouth to say that we don't want to be black and we call ourselves foundational Black Americans? I'm not an Aztec. I'm not any of that. I'm a foundational Black American because I'm proud to be what I am. But we do have Black Aboriginals. Let's acknowledge that. Sonny is a Spanish conquistador. That's exactly what he is.
Proven by just the way he acts and the way he talks. The other blacks, a lot of the Black community do not like FBA. They do not agree with the FBA. Do not about that racist. He wants to be something else. He doesn't want to be black. And you can prove it by just the way he acts and the way he talks. The other blacks, a lot of the Black community do not like FBA. They do not agree with the FBA. Do not want anything to do with the FBA. The FBA is a small racist group, like the Ku Klux Klan or Black Panthers or the Brown Berets. They're just a racist group. Their ideology is just holding up their race to higher standards than the rest. Not even higher standards, but to praise them as if they're like gods, and they're not. They're just like regular people. They struggle. Their ancestors had struggles just like we did. At one point, I think every race was slaves at one point in time. We've all learned to get past it.
Sonny don't know what he's talking about. It's a shame that a 70-year-old man knows nothing about history. Sonny, continue to speak about barrios and street gangs in prison, because that's as furthest as your knowledge goes. That's the furthest that your knowledge goes, bro.
FBA is one of those that haven't. They refuse to admit that people like this racist podcast that I'm speaking about is afraid to admit that he's a failure in life.
A failure in life. Sonny ain't got 2 nickels to rub together, and he's calling somebody a failure in life. You got an old grandpa calling somebody a failure in life, and I got way more money than him. I got way more accomplishments and way more money than him. Come on, Sonny. You're a 70-year-old man and you're ignorant when it comes to history. You know nothing. He said that the Black Seminoles are not FBA, when we all know that FBA are the ones who fled the slave plantations in Georgia and South Carolina and went to Florida, and they linked up with the runaway natives in Florida and created the Black Seminoles with them. Because keep in mind, the natives who fled to Florida, who escaped British colonies and fled to Florida, they needed protection as well. And the Spanish gave the native tribes protection in Florida. And when the runaway slaves fled to Florida, they linked up with the native tribes there, and they came together to create the Black Seminoles. The Black Seminoles. But according to Sonny, the Black Seminoles are not FBA. You talk about somebody being ignorant.
To praise them as if they're like gods, and they're not. They're just like regular people. They struggle. Their ancestors had struggles just like we did.
Sonny couldn't show you $5,000 right now. If I said, Sonny, show $5,000, he couldn't even show you $5,000. And he got the nerve to call somebody a failure. Sonny, why don't you show $5,000? Matter of fact, could you show 10 grand? I bet money you couldn't even show me 10 grand in your bank account, bro. I bet money you can't. You got the nerve to call somebody a failure when you a 70-year-old man who knows nothing about history. The failure is you, sir. You failed your people by spreading this You failed your people by spreading this conquistador version of history. You got a conquistador mindset. That's why you're spreading false rhetoric that comes from conquistador ideologies. Sonny didn't even know that black Seminoles that exist in Mexico celebrate Juneteenth. Juneteenth is an FBA celebration, and the black Seminoles that's in Mexico today still celebrate Juneteenth. But Sonny is too ignorant to know that.
At one point, I think every race was slaves at one point in time. We've all learned to get past it. FBA is one of those that haven't. They refuse to admit that people like this racist podcast that I'm speaking about is afraid to admit that he's a failure in life. That's it. He's a failure in life. I'm sorry, it's nothing against the black community, because the black community has a bunch of people that are pushing some positive seed for their families and their communities, and they're making great strides. But then you have people like this racist podcaster that wants to even embrace them, take their pride and their accomplishments as his own. That's just something I think about. Something that I wanted to talk about. The Seminoles were not a black tribe. They were an indigenous tribe that took in
the black Seminoles were a tribe of FBA people mixed with the runaway natives who fled to Florida to escape British colonies. You're ignorant, Sonny. The black Seminoles were a mixture of FBA people and the Seminoles who already fled to Florida to escape the British colony. They came together because they had a common enemy. They came together to form the black Seminoles. You got black Seminoles that exist in Mexico today.
Black slaves to save them and protect them. And this is the thanks they get, which reminds me of saying, no good deed goes unpunished. Have a blessed one, you guys.
Let's go to Mexico's Juneteenth right now. I'm gonna show you that. I'm gonna show you that. I'm gonna show you something.
3 is part of Black History Month. We are taking you to the Mexican village, which has celebrated Juneteenth. 3 is part of Black History Month. We are taking you to the Mexican village, which has celebrated Juneteenth for more than 150 years.
It's a community with strong tradition and a heritage that consists of Mexican, African, and Seminole culture. KPRC2's Keith Garvin shows us how it is a culture they are working hard to preserve.
Our roots are here. For us, everything began here.
When the black Seminoles fled to Mexico, they mixed in with some of the people that was there, but don't get it twisted for 1 second. They still celebrate their FBA culture because Juneteenth is an FBA celebration. But the Mexicans, the black Seminoles in Mexico celebrate Juneteenth because they're connected to their FBA culture in America. This is why Juneteenth is celebrated in Mexico by the black Seminoles.
It is a place most people have likely never heard of, much less visited, and one that many have left behind over the years. In the north-central section of the Mexican state of Coahuila, it sits just 115 miles from the Texas border, 450 miles from Houston, and 500 miles from Galveston. A village hours away, yet closely connected to the tradition of Juneteenth. It's interesting, the farther we drive into Mexico through towns like Seminoles and Musquis, the closer we actually get to black history, which is also Mexican history. That history took KPRC2 to Nacimiento de los Negros, in Spanish, birth of the blacks.
They got here July 12, 1850 to Coahuila.
Karina Torralba, who now lives in San Antonio, was born and raised in Nacimiento. Torralba grew up celebrating Juneteenth with the entire village. She's traveled back to Nacimiento to mark the holiday almost every year of her life. Like most people here today, she is an ethnic mix of Mexican, African, and Seminole, descendants of the Negros Muskogos, the phrase for black Seminoles.
And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have what we have here today. You know, this land, you know, this freedom.
So how did they wind up here in Mexico, and whatever caused them to start celebrating Juneteenth?
The history of Muskogos is so important here in Mexico because they grew up helping the government when the other groups were harming the land.
They started as escaped slaves from South Carolina and Georgia, taken in by the Seminole tribe in Florida in the 1820s. In the following decade, they were forced to Oklahoma, along with several other tribes, during what was known as the Trail of Tears. Although many had intermarried with the Florida Seminoles, because of their noticeably darker skin, they were under constant threat of kidnapping by slave traders. They eventually fled to Texas, then Mexico, where slavery had been abolished in 1829. The government granted them citizenship based on several stipulations. If the black Seminoles would defend the country's northern border and take Mexican names, they would receive money, livestock, and tools, plus 70,000 acres of land. They defended for several years, and they received the land that became Nacimiento.
The work that they did, you know, to free themselves, to liberate themselves, to make, you know, look for a safe place for their people as a tribe.
Slaves were set free in Galveston in 1865, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. When the news reached Nacimiento a few years later, the people here began celebrating El Dia de los Negros, the Day of the Blacks. It was a day to revel in solidarity, but also in relief. The end of slavery in neighboring Texas meant the Muskogos were no longer under threat of being captured and returned to bondage. About 300 people call Nacimiento home today, with others working to make sure the history and connection don't fade.
Karina, why is this place so important to you?
You know, I could remember being little and, you know, going to the river and just, it was a different feeling than living in the United States. It's one of my favorite places to be.
On this day, artist Cedric Huckabee of Fort Worth.
See, Sonny is so ignorant that he don't understand what black Seminoles are. But you can't expect for an old school drunk fool to understand history. Sonny needs to talk about barrios and Mexican gangs. That's as furthest his knowledge goes. His knowledge doesn't go any further than barrios and prison gangs. He said that black Seminoles are not FBA. Man, you crazy. FBA are the ones who fled to Florida to create the black Seminoles along with the Seminoles that was in Florida. They had a common enemy, so they came together to escape the British colonies because the Spanish in Florida said, if you runaway slaves can make it to Florida, then we'll give you freedom as long as you help us to fight out the British to stop the British from invading our territory. Right? Sonny doesn't understand history. He's a 70-year-old fool.
Worth is unveiling an exhibition at the Cultural Center featuring pastel drawings of 100 Nacimiento residents.
The people were warriors. I mean, literally, the Mexican government hired them to protect the borders. They're
at the Cultural Center featuring pastel drawings of 100 Nacimiento residents.
The people were warriors. I mean, literally, the Mexican government hired them to protect the borders. They're naturally fighters.
The project is being funded by the prestigious U.S. Fulbright program. Over 4 months, Huckabee sat down with each person for several hours, drawing them as they told their story. 75-year-old Juan Torralba, a lifelong resident, was one of his subjects.
What do you think when you see that picture?
Oh, I'm proud about this picture.
Huckabee says while this mix of Mexican, African, and Seminole culture is distinct, there are strong connections to the community of Black Americans.
Picture.
Oh, I'm proud about this picture.
Huckabee says while this mix of Mexican, African, and Seminole culture is distinct, there are strong connections to the community of Black Americans. Connections that need to be taught and celebrated.
I would like for this project to help tell the story. You know, to be an advocate for this community and their story and our story.
Oh, what an amazing story. An incredible assignment to be able to go there and to connect the dots, right, between Black History Month and the culture in Mexico. It's quite amazing.
It was a fantastic story to do and be a part of. Roger Franco was my photographer, and he did such an amazing job on that story. And one of my favorite stories ever. You know, I kind of fought for it for a few years. I knew about it. I knew about Nacimiento, and so I really wanted to go down there. Finally got permission.
So there you go, man. With Juneteenth is celebrated.
¡Sale, ya están listos! ¡Bandito vaquero!
Afro-Mexicans in Mexico.
This is the Danza de los Diablos, or the Dance of the Devils. It's performed on South Mexico's Pacific coast, the region with the country's largest concentration of Afro-Mexicans.
No es de la África la danza.
This dance Africa. They are Mexican, but these instruments are African and we make them ourselves. Now the Black people have united with the local culture and mixed with the local people along this coast, and we multiplied, and there are now many Black people here.
Sonny gonna be windmill.
This country is home to more than 1 million Afro-Mexicans, yet these are marginalized and often forgotten communities. They represent around 1% of the national population. Mexico's 2020 census is the first ever to include Afro-Mexican as an ethnic category.
So they barely added Black people to the census in 2020, and a Black man in Mexico, Vincent Guerrero, nicknamed El Negro, abolished slavery.
Mexico's legacy of slavery began hundreds of years ago.
The slaves in Mexico were in the places where there was mining. This town was founded around the year 1800, most likely by fugitive slaves who escaped to the coastal regions where they could survive on what they found here.
Today, that original African culture still exists in a state dominated by indigenous.
Now let's go there. You've seen that. Now check this out. Continue to bless that like button. They ain't gonna like this.
And recently, La Presidenta de Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, signed 2 edicts into law, which are breathtaking to see.
Now watch how the Blacks in Mexico are called Afro-Indigenous, because even the people of Mexico, the real scientists and anthropologists, have discovered that Blacks were in Mexico prior to the Europeans showing up. This is why they label these people Afro-Indigenous. What they should have just called them Black Aboriginals, because when you say Afro, you're calling them African. But that's a whole nother subject. I want you to listen to how Blacks in Mexico are now recognized as Afro-Indigenous people because they've been there for centuries. They didn't just show up some of them showed up on slave ships with the Europeans, but you had Blacks in the Americas prior to any Europeans showing up. But of course, Spanish conquistadors don't want to, they'll never admit the facts. It goes against their indoctrination.
Recently, La Presidenta de Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, signed 2.
When they started saying Afro, they was connecting that with Africans. You had Aboriginals who were Black people. But when they started saying Afro, they was associating that with Africans. But anyway, I'll do a whole nother video on that. But I want you to hear what the president of Mexico have said, and you have scientists and anthropologists said, no, these are Afro-indigenous people. Yeah, you had some blacks that came over on slave ships with the Spanish, but at the same time, you had blacks in the Americas, not just in Mexico. You had blacks in the Americas prior to any Europeans showing up. Check this out.
Recently, La Presidenta de Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo, signed 2 edicts into law, which are breathtaking to say the least. What she did and what she signed into the Mexican Constitution are 2 parts. The first part was that the indigenous people within Mexico of many different tribes will now have the ability to have their own sovereign nations. Now, bear with me here. So basically, a commission is set up to recognize those indigenous nations within Mexico and teach them and show them how they can rule autonomously and set up their own rulership over their own people, because there's a lot of indigenous different tribes within Mexico. The second part of that edict that was signed into the Mexican Constitution recognizes, and hear me out here, Afro-indigenous. So, and that basically states that written into the Mexican Constitution, it is now law that the Afro-indigenous are recognized as full citizens of Mexico and are afforded their indigenous status. And then she went on to state that Mexico recognizes that Afro-indigenous people were on this continent hundreds of years before the Spaniards stepped 1 foot on the soil. It completely changes the narrative of what we've been taught. It completely changes the idea that Columbus was here and there's just Mexicans. It flips it right on its head. Everything is out the door. This is a very intelligent woman. And what she has stated are what people on different social media platforms have been saying for years. Black man was already here. The black man was already here. We didn't come in slave ships. That's not feasible. It would have taken too many ships. They would lose too many people. But if you're taken from Mexico and South America and taken off the coast and sat off the coast for a couple months and then brought up and dropped off in Boston, that makes it a hell of a lot more feasible, doesn't it? Afro-indigenous were here hundreds of years before the Spaniards showed up. I'll put this into perspective. The English Bible, the most widely sold book in history, the Bible. New Testament, Old Testament, you can go back in that Bible to the beginning of time of man. Adam, Eve, his wife, conceived from the rib of Adam, and the Creator took that rib. Their children, Cain and Abel, and how that conflict and one brother slew the other. The creation of the earth, the waters, the fish in the deep, the firmament. Okay, enough Bible lesson for today. But yet we can't go back before Columbus. What was the black man's history? How did he get here? The Phoenician?
Boom. So there you go. Now I'm going to show you something else. I'm going to show you this clip. Check this out.
Did you know the first Mexicans were black, according to this renowned Mexican scholar? This claim might sound surprising.
Now you got Mexican scholars who are telling you that blacks were here prior to any European existence. But they're going to say, oh, that Mexican don't know what he's talking about. Check this out. Listen to this video.
Did you know the first Mexicans were black according to this renowned Mexican scholar? This claim might sound surprising and perhaps even challenge our understanding of Mexican history, but it comes from a credible source. Let's introduce Vicente Riva Palacio, a man of great intellectual prowess and political significance in Mexico. He was not just a politician but also a respected intellectual who made substantial contributions to Mexico's intellectual heritage. Palacio, the grandson of the great Mexican revolutionary and President Vicente Guerrero, played a pivotal role in fighting off the French intervention of Mexico in the mid-1860s. Following his tenure on the Supreme Court of Justice from 1868 to 1870, Palacio dedicated himself to writing. One of his most significant works acknowledges the black indigenous presence in the Americas. Intrigued? So, let's dive into the story of Vicente Riva Palacio and his research into the black indigenous presence in the Americas. Vicente Riva Palacio was not just any scholar, he was a man of action and thought. Born into a lineage of revolutionaries, he carried the legacy of his grandfather, the great Mexican revolutionary, and President Vicente Guerrero, who won Mexico their independence. But Palacio didn't just inherit a legacy, he built his own. He was a politician, an intellectual, and a fighter. During the mid-1860s, Palacio played a vital role in protecting Mexico during the French intervention. His courage and strategic brilliance were widely revered, but his contributions didn't stop at the battlefield. Palacio was also a respected intellectual, dedicating his later years to the craft of writing, adding to the intellectual prowess of Mexico. Elected to the Supreme Court of Justice from 1868 to 1870, Palacio's influence was felt far and wide. But it was his pen that left an indelible mark on the canvas of history. One of his most famous works, a collaboration with Mexican archaeologist Alfredo Chavero and others, was entitled Mexico Through the Centuries. This historical opus was more than just a chronicle, it was an acknowledgement of the diverse roots of Mexican culture. It was a journey through time, tracing the footprints of the first inhabitants of the Americas, offering insights into their lives, their struggles, and their contributions to the world as we know it today. Mexico Through the Centuries was not just a book, it was a milestone in Mexican historiography. It was a testament to Palacio's intellectual prowess and his commitment to uncovering the truth, no matter how uncomfortable or controversial it might be. It was in this very work that Palacio made the groundbreaking acknowledgement of the black indigenous presence in the Americas. So, what exactly did Palacio say about the black indigenous presence in the Americas? Well, let's dive into the heart of the matter. In his work, Mexico Through the Centuries, Palacio delves into the mysterious origins of the first inhabitants of the Americas. He starts by questioning the existence of the black man on the continent. According to him, the black race was the first in the world and spread all over it due to the union of the continents. He poses a thought-provoking question: did the Otomi already exist here when the black man arrived? The Otomi, for those who might not know, are an indigenous people of Mexico. He suggests that the black race might have been expelled, leaving behind traces that contradict the autochthonous characters of the Otomi race. Palacio then draws our attention to the archaeological evidence. He points out the little heads from Teotihuacan, an ancient Mesoamerican city located in a sub-valley of the Valley of Mexico, as a clear trace of the black race. These little heads made of clay were found in burial mounds among various objects. Palacio suggests that these heads were not formed arbitrarily, but were modeled after certain individuals. He notes that some of these heads have distinct features like flattened noses and protruding lips, which could only be attributed to individuals of the black race. He goes further to say that among these little heads, some belong to known types, while others refer to figures and headdresses that are completely strange and different from those recorded in historical times, indicating unknown ages and races different from those of later times. In essence, Palacio believes that these little heads are a testament to the ancient existence of the black race on the continent. According to him, the discovery of these heads of the black race type is enough to venture the affirmation of their ancient existence in the region. According to Palacio, these archaeological findings are clear traces of the black race, indicating that they were among the first inhabitants of what is now Mexico. So, the first Mexicans were black, according to Vicente Riva Palacio. This is not a frivolous claim. Palacio, a respected scholar, politician, and the grandson of a revolutionary, left no stone unturned in his research. His inhabitants of what is now Mexico. Race type is enough to venture the affirmation of their ancient existence in the region. According to Palacio, these archaeological findings are clear traces of the black race, indicating that they were among the first inhabitants of what is now Mexico. So, the first Mexicans were black, according to Vicente Riva Palacio. This is not a frivolous claim. Palacio, a respected scholar, politician, and the grandson of a revolutionary, left no stone unturned in his research. His findings, as documented in Mexico through the centuries, revealed the existence of a black indigenous presence in the Americas. This was a time long before the arrival of the Otomi, one of the earliest known inhabitants of Mexico. Palacio's evidence? Intriguing little clay heads discovered in the ruins of Teotihuacan, an ancient city in Mexico. These artifacts, detailed with flattened noses and protruding lips, were indicative of the black race. The uniqueness of these facial features, so distinct from other types known in historical times, led Palacio to a bold conclusion: the first Mexicans were black. This is a fascinating topic that challenges our conventional understanding of history and reminds us that there is always more to learn. This journey through America's hidden past is just beginning. If this glimpse into a world lost to time has captured your imagination, smash that like button.
Oh man, listen, let me say this. Let me say this. A lot of people gonna get their panties in a bunch over this, man, but I'm just giving you the historical facts, man. I'm just giving you the facts. Hold on. All right, that's cool. I had to move my thing. I'm just giving you the historical facts, man. You know, it's scientifically proven that blacks already existed on this continent prior to any European contact. Now, you can deny it. The evidence is just true. You got Mexican scholars. Why do you think they're calling blacks in Mexico Afro-Indigenous? Now, of course, you had some, you know, the black Seminoles who fled there, but you already had black people in Mexico way before the black Seminoles went to Mexico. This goes against their indoctrination. They're going to be punching. They're going to be windmilling in the air, saying, oh, no, it's not true. You can't expect for a group of people who's been indoctrinated by Spanish conquistadors to give you the facts about history. It's just not going to happen. Shout out to everybody for pulling up today. I wanted to shout out to Reggie. Shout out to Reggie for the Cash App. Shout out to Xavier for the PayPal. And I appreciate everybody for pulling up today, man. I wanted to give you guys some heat. We're going to give you some more heat for New Year's tomorrow, January 1st, 2026. But I wanted to give you guys some heat. You know, for this is one of my last streams for 2025. So we wanted to give you guys some real smoke, some real heat, something that you can relate to, something that will resonate with you. This is why I deliver this dope content. Peace to everybody pulling up. I appreciate everybody for supporting the channel. It is what it is. It's King Supreme, delivering straight-laced gang. Sonny, you're 70 years old. You're uneducated, and nobody with common sense is going to listen to you. The Black Seminoles have direct blood ties to FBA. The Black Seminoles have direct blood ties to FBA. It is a known fact. That's why the Black Seminoles in Mexico celebrate Juneteenth, because they are paying homage to their FBA roots in America. Juneteenth was celebrated in Galveston, Texas, after the North defeated the South in the Civil War. So it's not my fault that Sonny is a 70-year-old ignorant man. I mean, it's not my fault. Sonny, stick to talking about Mexican vadios and what goes on in prison. You ain't got no business speaking about history at all. So peace to the fam. Peace, love, and blessings to the chat. Salute. Make sure that you guys subscribe to the channel. Bless the like button. It ain't nothing. And yeah, man, I'm going to get up out of here. Peace to everybody.